Chapter 1159. By Ziweng, Big Blockhead, Big Rice Bucket. By Ziweng, Big Blockhead, Big Rice Bucket. By Ziweng, Big Blockhead, Big Rice Bucket. At the entrance of Zhang Ji's iron shop, a group of children were jumping and singing nursery rhymes while pointing at the dazed Bai Ziweng. Some people even threw rotten vegetable leaves at him. Bai Ziweng scratched his head and giggled. A group of little bastards scram for this old lady. At this time, a tall and sturdy woman holding a broom rushed out. She looked very fierce. The laughing and scolding group of children immediately scattered in fright. As they ran, they cursed. Zhang Chuihua, female Yiksha, called Wawa, "Little bastard, don't run." Chuihua held the broom and chased after them. She was so angry that her whole body was trembling. When she returned to the entrance of her house, she saw the youth sitting at the entrance and giggling. She became angry and said, "You idiot, you can still laugh after being scolded." After she finished scolding him, she remembered why she was bickering with him. Her expression softened and she said, "Hungry? I'll go cook for you." Inside the house, there were 2 dishes and a soup on the table. There were 2 steamed buns in the bowl and half a bucket of rice. Seeing Bai Ziweng wolfing down his food, Cui Hua couldn't help but carefully wipe his mouth. She said, "Blockhead, can you eat a bit slower? No one is going to steal from you." Although old Zhang named the youth Bai Ziweng, Cui Hua felt that it was a mouthful and just called him Blockhead. Old Zhang silently looked at all of this. He didn't move his chopsticks and sighed with worry. Cui Hua said, "Father, what's wrong?" "There's a war again." Old Zhang sighed softly. "I heard that many people died in this battle. Many people lost their homes and lost their homes. Famine has begun to spread everywhere. Rebels have appeared among the victims. It is said that the rebels have already reached the county." At this point, he couldn't help but look at the youth who was holding the bucket and eating. He shook his head again. Now there is a shortage of food everywhere. Money has depreciated. If we continue to eat like this, in less than a month, our whole family will have nothing to eat. Then what should we do? Cui Hua suddenly panicked. "Father, it's not like you don't know. Blockhead has been repairing the plank road for the past few days. They only gave him porridge to eat. After a few days, he has lost weight. What else can we do? I just hope that the war won't affect us." Old Zhang shook his head. "Tomorrow I'll go to the mountains to pick some wild vegetables and catch some game. I'll make them into dried goods and store them for emergencies. I'll eat less in the future and give my share to Blockhead." After saying that, Cui Hua took out a handkerchief and very carefully wiped the soup stains on the corner of the young man's mouth. Old Zhang's face twitched slightly. He hesitated for a moment and couldn't help but ask, "Do you like this silly boy?" "Father, what are you talking about?" Cui Hua's face turned red and she buried her head. "There are no outsiders in the room. Why can't you say it?" Old Zhang did not intend to let her go. "I'm already in my 50s this year. I don't have many years left to live. The person I'm most worried about is you. Your mother died early. Although I was the one who raised you, you matured much earlier than your peers. You started to learn to cook, do housework, do farm work, and even help me forge iron when you were only 6 or 7 years old." At this point, old Zhang looked ashamed. "Outsiders say that you're more capable than the average man. As your father, I don't feel good when I hear it, because it's precisely because of this that your happiness has been delayed." "Father." Cui Hua's eyes were slightly red. "Listen to me." Old Zhang interrupted her and sternly said, "You're going to be 22 soon. It's impossible to be single forever. Father can accompany you for a lifetime. Since you like this silly boy, then we might as well set a date for the 2 of you to get married." Do you think I haven't seen that you like this silly boy these days?" Old Zhang glared at her. Then, with a complicated expression, he looked at the youth who was eating and said, "Although this silly boy is silly and eats a lot, if it was in the past, I would definitely not agree." He paused for a moment. His eyebrows were full of lethargy. "But now there are military disasters everywhere. It would be dangerous for you to marry a normal person without any ability. It's better to marry this silly boy. At least he won't be sent to the front lines. Then I'll listen to father, Chui Hua said in a low voice with a red face. I've calculated the date for you. The 6th day of next month is an auspicious day. In other words, there's still half a month. Old Zhang seemed to have already prepared it. He continued to arrange. When the time comes, we'll set up 2 tables and invite the villagers to a meal. On that day, the news of Zhang Ji's ironworks wedding spread throughout the village. After knowing that Chui Hua was going to marry a fool, the entire village thought that old Zhang had gone crazy. Old Zhang did not explain. He smiled and went from house to house to inform them of the date. He even gave some money to the official in charge of supervising the repair of the plank road and asked for 3 days of leave for Bai Ziwing on the day of the wedding. Seeing that it was hopeless to persuade old Zhang, the entire village could only accept it. In this turbulent era, being able to witness a couple of newlyweds was a happy event. What everyone did not know was that there was an invisible killing intent slowly approaching them in the darkness. In the great Kuan dynasty that East Jiang village belonged to, a man wearing a dragon robe sat absent-mindedly on the dragon throne. He looked at the battle report in his hand and murmured, defeated. The 800,000-strong army was defeated. Below him stood many courtiers. They all had their heads lowered and were trembling in fear, not saying a single word. In the past half a month, the newly established Great Qin dynasty had gathered the strength of the southern region and entered the central state with the help of the demon region. They fought against the attacks of the 3 great imperial dynasties and many holy lands. Even so, the Great Qin dynasty fought and won. Especially after the emperor of the Great Qin dynasty broke through to the emperor's throne realm, the flames of war intensified. Dynasties and empires were destroyed almost every day. As a force under the Great Yin imperial dynasty, the Great Kuan dynasty naturally had to participate in the war against the forces under the Great Qin dynasty. However, in the past half a month, they had suffered continuous defeats. There was even civil unrest in the country. The disaster victims formed a rebel army and caused chaos everywhere. Your Majesty, after a while a general could not help but say, the Daluo dynasty's army under the Great Qin dynasty has already reached our Great Kuan territories, Lin Prefecture. What should we do now? Everyone's expression changed when they heard this. To the north of Lin and Prefecture was the territory conquered by the enemy nation. To the south was 2/3 of Great Kuan's territory. In other words, the enemy nation had already conquered 1/3 of their territory. It had only been half a month. An official said weakly, "Why don't we surrender? It seems like the Great Yin imperial dynasty is finished. We might as well surrender to the Great Qin dynasty. That way, we might still have a chance of survival." As soon as he finished speaking, his entire body suddenly split into a few pieces. The entire hall was dead silent. Surrender? This is what happens to those who dare to betray the Great Yin imperial dynasty. As a gloomy voice rang out in the hall, a black-clothed man descended. Emperor of Great Kuan stood up subconsciously. "Greetings, envoy. By the order of the Great Yin Emperor, I order you to gather all the spirit veins in the country and set up the 10,000 ghost soul devourer in Lin, and Prefecture to slaughter the 1 million people in Lin and Prefecture." The man in black's sinister voice resounded in the hall. The 10,000 ghost soul devourer array, fused with 1 million dead souls, will definitely deal a heavy blow to the Great Qin dynasty. What? Emperor of Great Kuan's hair stood on end. Slaughter the 1 million people. P.S. Chapter 4 updated for today. Don't think it's a stretch. This is the best point I can think of to enter the central state. Only this way can we find the female lead and the others quickly. End of this chapter. Chapter 1160. Time flew by, and several days passed in the blink of an eye. In these few days, the greatest change in East Jiang village was that every family was preparing for funerals. The elderly cried, and the women and children despaired. The war was too tragic. The great Kuan dynasty had been beaten back by the enemy, the Daluo dynasty. None of the people from East Jiang village who had been captured and sent to the front lines had returned alive. The escalation of the war also caused the price of grain to rise and the value of money to depreciate. In the past, 1 jin of rice cost 20 copper coins, but now it had increased tenfold to 200 copper coins. Even so, tens of thousands of people still fought over it. Even East Jiang village was no exception. It wasn't that no one thought of escaping to a safe place, but it was said that the rebel army had already reached the prefecture. Moreover, most of the people in East Jiang village were old and weak, women and children who were unwilling or unable to leave their homeland. Steward Wu is still the smart one. He noticed something was wrong and reminded me to buy a house in the capital. Once the war reaches here, I'll move my family there. But this is also a good thing. At least before I leave, I can still make a fortune. East Jiang village's richest man, Zhang Yuanwei, smiled as he looked at the long line of people waiting in front of his house just to buy grain. He sold the moldy, worm-ridden old rice from his warehouse at 300 copper coins per jin. He wasn't afraid that no one would buy it. Old Zhang was also in the line. He'd spent all his savings to buy a bag of rice. Before leaving, he glared fiercely at Zhang Yuanwei's fat body and cursed in a low voice. "Pa! A bastard who makes a fortune during a national crisis will die a horrible death." At the entrance of Zhang Ji Ironworks, a white-haired youth dressed in coarse clothes sat in a daze. Cui Hua, who was wearing women's clothes for the first time, stood behind him and gently combed his long hair with a comb. It could be said that the white-haired youth was the least affected in all of East Jiang village. He ate and slept every day. After the marriage was confirmed, old Zhang treated him as family. He knew that he had a large appetite and would rather eat chaff for himself and his daughter to save a portion of their rations. As Cui Hua combed his long hair, she murmured, "Blockhead, do you really not remember who you are?" She did not know how many times she had tried this, but she did not get a response from the young man every time. "Who am I?" However, this time, the white-haired young man's body trembled slightly. He seemed to have asked a question instead, and a hint of confusion flashed in his eyes. "You remember?" Cui Hua's hands froze. Then she walked in front of him and nervously sized up his handsome face. "Who am I?" The white-haired young man asked again. His eyes began to struggle as if he were in pain. Then he held his head with both hands and began to scream. His change immediately frightened Cui Hua. The latter hurriedly comforted him. "If you can't remember, then don't think about it. If you can't remember, then don't think about it." Plop! The youth fell to the ground and fainted on the spot. Old Zhang, who came back with a bag of rice, immediately rushed over. "What happened to him?" "Father, Blockhead seems to have remembered something, but it's very painful." Cui Hua's eyes were red. "Give me a hand. Quickly carry him in." In the next few days, old Zhang tried to make the white-haired young man remember the past. However, every time he mentioned it, the white-haired young man would scream as if he was possessed. In the end, old Zhang simply stopped asking, and the young man also returned to normal. However, every day he would sit at the door, either in a daze or writing something on the ground with a branch. "Father, what word did Blockhead write?" Cui Hua called old Zhang out and pointed to a word on the ground. "It seems to be a simplified version of Mo," old Zhang said uncertainly. He had only studied in a private school for 2 years and did not know many words. "What does Mo mean?" "I don't know either." Half a month for everyone in Dongzhang village was extremely difficult because the days were getting more and more difficult. However, for the white-haired young man it was like a dream. In this chaotic world, for everyone the better news was that it was said that the rebel army in the county had been wiped out. Some people tried to move south, but found that the entire Lin and county had set up checkpoints everywhere, not allowing people to move around. Even Zhang Yuanwei of Dongzhang village was no exception. Some people tried to break through the checkpoints, but in exchange they were killed on the spot. The official statement to the outside world was to strictly investigate the enemy spies and spies. Lin and County, Prefectural Prime Minister's Mansion. Prefectural Prime Minister Lu Yuan knelt on the ground and respectfully said to an old eunuch in front of him, "This lowly official greets Eunuch Wang. Lord Lu, this time I'm patrolling incognito. I'm here to convey the imperial edict to you by the emperor's order." An old eunuch with a fair face and no beard smiled, then handed the imperial edict in his hand to Lu Yuan. "I won't read it. It's all on it, and only Lord Lu can read it. Don't leak it." Lu Yuan got up and took the imperial edict with both hands. After looking at it carefully, his whole body suddenly stiffened. Thousand ghosts devouring formation. Slaughter! Slaughter the millions of people in my Lin and County, he panted heavily like a bellows, and his eyes were full of disbelief. That was the lives of millions of people. More importantly, it was the people under his jurisdiction. "Lord Lu, His Majesty has high hopes for you. I believe that you will not let him down." The old eunuch walked over and patted his shoulder lightly. "In order to show his favor to you, His Majesty has just sent people to bring your family to the capital city. It can be considered as being away from the chaos of war and basking in the Emperor's grace." Lu Yuan's mind was buzzing, as though he was struck by lightning. His eyes became bloodshot, and his whole body trembled. After a few seconds, he knelt down heavily with his trembling body and stammered, I accept the imperial edict. Very good." The old eunuch smiled and nodded. "In order to cooperate with Lord Lu, I've brought someone this time. He will definitely be able to get twice the result with half the effort." As his voice fell, a black shadow suddenly appeared in the enclosed room. "Lord Lu, this is Lord Suo from the Fallen Spirit sect. You must listen to his arrangements. At the same time, make arrangements for the 100,000 troops, and do not leak the news. North of Lin and County, 1,000 miles away, amidst the endless flags, there was a huge tent. In the tent, there were several figures with strong auras sitting upright. Everyone, the one standing in our way now, is the great Kuin dynasty's Lin and County." A man in armor pointed at the huge sand map and said with assurance, "Although Lin and County is only a county with a population of only 1 million, it is the throat of the great Kuin kingdom. We must occupy this place before we can directly attack the capital of the great Kuin kingdom." The others nodded repeatedly when faced with his analysis, and a gray-robed old man frowned and said, "It's only a county. Why don't we launch an attack right now? There's no rush. We, the Zenith Heaven Immortal Realm, are only here to assist in the battle. All military plans will have to go according to the Great Qin Envoy's arrangements." The armored man shook his head slightly. "If nothing goes wrong, the Lord Emissary will send the order to attack before tomorrow night." Someone could not help but laugh. "General Yang, what do you think the Great Qin will reward us if we, the Zenith Heaven Immortal, destroy the Great Kuin?" "I don't know about that." The armored man shook his head and laughed. "But one thing is for sure, based on how the Great Qin treats others, they will definitely not treat us badly." At this moment, a messenger walked into the tent and knelt on one knee. "General Yang, the Lord Emissary has a special mission for me to convey to you." After saying that, he took out a portrait from his bosom. General Yang took it and opened it. The person in the portrait was a young man with deep eyes and a dignified look on his face. The most eye-catching thing about him was his head of white hair. Everyone in the tent was puzzled. General Yang frowned and looked at the kneeling messenger. "Does the Lord Emissary have anything else to say?" The Lord Emissary said that if we encounter the person in the portrait, we must report to him. The messenger did not dare to hide anything and said slowly, "It is said that this order was personally issued by the Great Qin Emperor. Anyone who knows about it will be greatly rewarded." Everyone in the room gasped in shock. The Great Qin Emperor, greatly rewarded. "You may leave." After the messenger left, General Liang took a deep breath and his eyes flickered. Why is the emperor looking for this person? End of this chapter. Chapter 1161. The next day, the 6th day of the 5th month of the lunar calendar, the gloomy Eastjiang village finally had a hint of liveliness. The Zhang family smithy was going to hold a wedding. Eastjiang village had already known about this so-called wedding half a month ago. Old Zhang was going to marry his daughter to a fool he picked up from the streets. In the past, the villagers might have talked about it as a joke. However, under the dark clouds of war, no one had the mood to do so. Many people were already hungry. Now that the Zhang family was going to hold a wedding, they would definitely hold a banquet. Therefore, the villagers went to the Zhang family to help. They were busy until night time. There were a few red lanterns hanging at the entrance of the Zhang family smithy. Coupled with some laughter, it looked like a wedding. Old Zhang's original plan was to hold 3 to 5 tables. However, when he thought that everyone's life was not easy, he gritted his teeth and held 10 tables. However, the food on each table was not very sumptuous. There were a few plates of wild vegetables and a bowl of soup with oil visible. Even so, many of the originally pale villagers ate their fill. After the meal, some children formed groups to play, shouting that they wanted to make a scene in the bridal chamber. The white-haired young man was wearing a clean green shirt with a red flower hanging on his chest. He was surrounded by many children and only cared about giggling. The villagers wanted to tell him to treat the woman well in the future. However, when they thought of the former's IQ, they did not bother to say anything. Old Zhang did not mind. After the crowd dispersed, he dragged the white-haired young man into the house and said with a complicated expression, "Do you know what to do when you go in?" "Sleep." The white-haired young man said happily. Old Zhang wanted to say something, but in the end he sighed softly. "Forget it. Go in." "I'm hungry." The white-haired young man hurriedly shook his head. "Get in. You can eat tomorrow." Old Zhang was so angry that he directly pushed him into the newly decorated room. Then, ignoring the young man's resistance, he forcefully locked the door from the outside. "Mother of the child, you can rest in peace." Old Zhang wiped his tears, picked up a blanket, and walked into the smithy. He took out the fruit wine that he brewed himself and drank it in one gulp. Under such a hazy moonlight, the entire Lin and county set off a silent bloody massacre. The 100,000-strong army was divided into many small teams and rushed to dozens of small villages under the county. The cold blades cut through the throats and pierced into the warm, innocent bodies outside Lin and county. In the midst of the dense torches, a newly built huge altar could be vaguely seen. The altar was about 1,000 square meters, and there were all kinds of strange runes drawn on it. The area below the altar was filled with spiritual energy. The spiritual qi was so dense that it was almost liquefied, and one could vaguely see streams of dragon-shaped airflow supporting the entire altar. In the middle of the altar, there were a dozen gloomy men in black robes, chanting something. The black-robed old man in the lead of the altar pinched his fingers lightly, his expression constantly changing. The person beside him asked, "Senior brother, what's wrong?" The black-robed old man frowned. "In order to complete this 1,000-spirit devourer formation, I'm afraid we need a ferocious spirit as the main spirit." "Ferocious spirit?" One of the black-robed men replied. "The people we kill are at most souls of the dead. A ferocious spirit needs to have a great amount of resentment. It's best if it's a person with the 8 characters of the horoscope and the weather tonight." "That's right, it's best if it's a woman." Someone else replied, "Women are of the Yin attribute and they're dressed in red. If they were to undergo the concoction of the fallen spirit sect, they would be able to give birth to a ferocious spirit." The black-robed old man pondered for a long time before giving his orders. "Pass down my orders. If any of the villages see any women dressed in red, bring them all here." Dongzhang village in the dead of night. Every household had their doors tightly shut. Apart from the red lanterns hanging outside Zhang Yuanwei and Zhangji smithy, the entire Dongzhang village was in a state of silence. Inside Zhang Yuanwei's mansion, dozens of black shadows appeared in the darkness of the night. All of them leaped up at the same time, climbing the walls and leaping into the mansion. Plop, plop, plop. The darkness of the night was filled with the glaring gleam of a blade. One by one, corpses fell to the ground as the pungent smell of blood permeated the air. Within a few breaths of time, the entire mansion, including the servants and the guards, were all dead. Old Master, you've hurt me. Old Master's spirit is almost lost because of you. At this point, from the largest room, a faint sound of pain and numbness could be heard. More than a dozen black shadows silently moved forward to meet them. Within the huge room, the fat man, Zhang Yuanwei, was hugging a woman dressed in red, panting heavily. Little Xiang, if you can give Old Master a baby this time, Old Master will give you a title. Old Master still needs to buy you a lot of high-quality rouge and face powder. Old Master doesn't lack money. Just as this voice was about to reach its climax, a bright, curved blade pierced through the curtains and sliced Zhang Yuanwei's neck. Blood flowed like a fountain. The woman on the bed was scared out of her wits. Another blade slashed towards her, but it was stopped by someone. Don't kill her, bring her back. This scene seemed to be playing out in every house in Dongzhang village. The dark red color of blood rippled in the night. In Zhangji iron shop, several men dressed in black approached like ghosts, their shining blades piercing through the darkness. Child's mother! In the simple wooden shed, the drunken old Zhang had already fallen asleep, mumbling as if he was sleep-talking. What's that sound? One of the men in black stopped in his tracks, then turned around and walked step by step towards the wooden shed on the side. At this moment, a black cat suddenly jumped out of the wooden shed, letting out an ear-piercing cry as it fled in panic. So it's a stray cat! The man let out a sigh of relief, then turned around to look at the brightly lit house and said in a low voice, "There's only one left." In the simple and crude bridal room, the oil lamp was bright. Cui Hua, who had long since put on a red wedding dress, quietly looked at the white-haired youth who was eating a piece of cake in front of her. Her slightly delicate and pretty facial features had a touch of captivating red. When the white-haired youth finished eating the cake in his hand, she couldn't help but reach out to wipe the corner of his mouth and softly said, "Are you full?" "Hungry." The white-haired youth looked at her anxiously. Cui Hua was immediately annoyed and unhappily said, "Eat, eat, eat. You only know how to eat. Don't you know what day it is tonight?" "Hungry," the youth said in a low and muffled voice, then got up, obviously wanting to go out to find food. "Don't move first." Cui Hua immediately pressed him down and fiercely said, "Listen to me for a few words. I'll find something for you to eat." The white-haired youth obediently sat down, very obedient. End of this chapter. Chapter 1162. Uft. Looking at his simple and honest appearance, Cui Hua could not help but laugh. Then she reached out and gently caressed his face. "Blockhead, do you know? Although I am not clear about your identity and origin, I know that you are definitely not an ordinary person." Her eyes were full of gentleness. "At most, I can be considered a village girl. I have no experience, and I am not good-looking. Apart from having strength, it can be said that I have nothing good about me. I am not worthy of you. But I really like you. Outsiders say that you are stupid, but in my opinion you are stupid to the point of being cute." At this point, a sense of inferiority emerged in her eyes. "I am not tired of being with you at all. I admit that I am a little selfish, but don't worry, I will find a way with Father to restore your memory." Hungry, the white-haired youth began to protest. Okay, I will go out and find food for you. I don't know if Father is asleep." She wiped away her tears and smiled sweetly. Then she got up and walked towards the door. In the end, she found that the door could not be pushed open at all. It was as if it was locked. "Father, are you asleep? Open the door for me." Cui Hua shook the door and shouted, Boom! At that moment, the tightly closed door suddenly shattered. She, along with the broken pieces of the door, fell heavily to the ground. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh! More than 10 black figures jumped in. Each of them held a shining, curved blade in their hands. Their bodies were bathed in the pungent smell of blood. Who are you people? Shui Hua could not care about the sharp pain in her hand. She subconsciously got up and looked at them with fear. The red-clothed woman? The eyes of the leading, black-clothed man focused. Then he scanned the inside of the house. His gaze fell on the white-haired man at the side. Take this woman away. Kill the man. Following his order, someone held a curved blade and walked towards the white-haired man with large strides. The white-haired man immediately shouted in fear. You dare! Seeing this scene, Cui Hua's expression changed slightly. She did not know where the courage came from, but she stood in front of the white-haired man. She casually grabbed a stick and waved it with all her might. The man immediately stopped his steps. Do it! The leading, black-clothed man coldly snorted. Who are you people? At this time, a drunken, questioning voice came from outside the door. Surprisingly, old John, who was sleeping in the wooden shed, was awakened by the sound of the door breaking. What he got in response was a sharp saber light. Old Zhang's hair stood on end as he instinctively dodged in a panic. Even so, his right arm was chopped off by the saber, and the piercing pain completely woke him up. Dad! Cui Hua, who witnessed this scene, burst into tears. Taking advantage of this gap, a black-clothed man instantly got close to her and knocked the stick out of her hand. Then he grabbed it. You bastards! Let go of my daughter! Old Zhang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He grabbed an axe by the door and rushed in. Bang! However, his entire body was kicked away. Kill them all and burn the house. The leading black-clothed man ignored Cui Hua's resistance and walked out of the room. His incomparably indifferent voice sounded. Kill! A black-clothed man held a scimitar and slashed at the white-haired man who was yelling. In his opinion, facing such ordinary people, he could split them in half with one slash. Let me go! Let me go! Blockhead, Dad! I beg you, don't kill Blockhead and my dad. Cui Hua struggled with all her might and cried bitterly. Old Zhang had lost a lot of blood. He struggled to stand up, but he found that he could not muster any strength at all. He could only watch as the saber landed on the white-haired youth's body, clang with an ear-piercing sound of metal colliding. The incomparably sharp saber did not hurt the white-haired youth at all. Instead, a gap appeared on the edge of the saber. How is this possible? The black-clothed man's face was full of disbelief. His saber was forged in the army. It was unknown how many enemies' heads had been chopped off. Even if the opponent's body was made of stone, there should at least be a crack. Don't kill me! Don't kill me! The white-haired youth shrank in the corner and trembled as he shouted. The rest of the people also noticed that something was wrong. With a loud bang, they swarmed up, and more than a dozen sharp sabers slashed at the white-haired youth. Clang, clang, clang! With a burst of sparks, more than a dozen people were shocked to find that the sabers in their hands were all broken, and the white-haired youth in front of them was still unharmed. This time, even Cui Hua and old Zhang, who had already lost all hope, were shocked. The black-clothed man who was the leader outside the house narrowed his eyes and immediately said, There's something wrong with this person. We can't stay for long. Go! He had lived in the army for a long time and had heard that there were cultivators who specialized in training their bodies and were invulnerable. He did not expect to meet one today. The dozen or so people had long been scared out of their wits and rushed out in a hurry. The black-clothed man who was the leader grabbed Cui Hua and was about to leave. However, old Zhang rushed over and hugged his feet tightly. You're not allowed to leave. Let go of my daughter. Old thing, get lost. The black-clothed man wanted to shake him off, but found that old Zhang was hugging him tightly and would not let go no matter what. Kill him. Quickly kill him. He roared again and again. Immediately after, Someone slashed at old Zhang's back with a saber, and blood immediately splashed everywhere. The white-haired youth, who was originally shouting in the house, suddenly quieted down when he saw this scene. There was a strong struggle in his eyes. "Father!" Cui Hua screamed at the top of her lungs. "Don't kill my father! Don't kill my father! Blockhead! Quickly, quickly save my father!" However, old Zhang still tightly hugged the black-clothed man's leg and said word by word, Let go of my daughter!" Another few slashes were slashed down, directly cutting off old Zhang's hands and feet. His flesh and blood were a mess. "Father!" Cui Hua almost fainted. The white-haired youth suddenly hugged his head and screamed. Countless scenes emerged in his mind like a tide. "Go, quickly go!" The black-clothed man, who was the leader, directly knocked Cui Hua out, jumped, and directly disappeared into the darkness. The remaining dozen or so people lit torches and threw more than 10 torches into the house. Suddenly, a monstrous fire was ignited. In the raging fire, the white-haired youth was still hugging his head and screaming. The surrounding hot flames did not cause him any harm. "Blockhead! I'm a blockhead!" "No, I'm not a blockhead!" The white-haired youth tried his best to digest the memories in his mind. "Who am I? I'm Yi Qin. I'm the mad southern immortal. I'm mad southern Yi." Subsequently, he was no longer in pain, and he no longer screamed. His blank eyes gradually became clear. "I remember now. I'm Yi Qin. I disregarded the restriction of true origin energy and forcefully performed the true spirit 9 transformations. I transformed into the ancient demonic ape and fought against 6 martial saints. I was ambushed by an emperor's throne powerhouse." End of this chapter. Chapter 1163. Outside the house, more than 10 men in black sneered as they looked at the raging fire in front of them. "Even if this person has a powerful body, he can't be afraid of fire, can he?" "That's right. Unless he's a god." However, just as they were about to leave, the scene that greeted them shocked them to death. The raging fire that seemed to be able to devour everything suddenly split apart as if it had a life of its own. A white-haired young man slowly stepped out of the air. The first thing that everyone saw was the white-haired young man's pupils. Then they screamed and retreated a few steps, covering their eyes. They saw 2 balls of golden flames in the white-haired young man's pupils. The flames burned in his eyes as if they were looking at 2 small suns at close range. "Why are you a human or a ghost?" A man in black looked at Yi Chun in fear and said, while trembling, "Kill him." The rest of them braced themselves and charged forward. At the next moment, however, they realized that they could not move their bodies as if they had been immobilized. Yi Chun walked slowly to old Zhang's side. He lowered his head and looked at the bloody man who was only breathing weakly. A complicated expression flashed through his eyes as he could not help but recall the scenes that had happened since he woke up. Those scenes were like a dream. Although it was only a short month, it seemed like an endless cycle of reincarnation. If you go with the flow, you'll become immortal. And if you go against the flow, you'll become an immortal. Thanks to you guys, I've comprehended the concept of becoming immortal again. Yi Chen sighed softly and waved his sleeve. A large amount of spiritual energy in his body surged into old Zhang's body. If one took a closer look, it was not just spiritual energy, but also a faint concept. This concept seemed to be the law of heaven and earth, under the horrified gazes of the men in black who were frozen. Old Zhang's severed limbs began to regenerate at a speed visible to the naked eye. The wounds on his body quickly scabbed. "I am not dead?" Old Zhang, who had woken up, was both surprised and confused. He could not help but say when he saw Yi Qin standing before him, "And Blockhead, are you all right?" "Old man, my name is Yi Qin." Yi Qin smiled lightly. "Why Yi Qin?" Old Zhang was slightly stunned. He then looked at Yi Qin in disbelief. "Why you remember?" In his eyes, Yi Qin's gaze was no longer dull. It was extremely deep, like a bottomless abyss. "Not bad." Yi Qin said, "Thank you for taking care of me these days." For some reason, in that instant, old Zhang felt an indescribable sense of disappointment. He didn't have time to think too much and begged bitterly, "Save. Quickly save Cui Hua." "Of course." Yi Chen nodded lightly and turned around to look at the dozen or so men in black before him. Red lightning flashed in his eyes. Great Qin Dynasty, 100 Dynasty War, Great Kuan Dynasty, Lin County, 10,000 ghost soul-devouring array. Countless information surged into his mind, and traces of murderous aura appeared between his brows. In order to set up such a sinister formation, you didn't hesitate to slaughter millions of people. "Good, very good. Old man, let's go. I'll bring you there. I know where they are." Yi Chen lifted his head slowly and looked at old Zhang. Old Zhang subconsciously looked at the dozen or so men in black next to him. "What about them?" Under his terrified gaze, the bodies of the dozen or so people suddenly burst into flames. Then they turned into countless specks of light that looked like fireflies and scattered everywhere. "Let's go!" Yi Chen waved his sleeve. Amidst old Zhang's exclamation, he carried him 5 kilometers away with a single step. 100 kilometers away, a man in black grabbed a woman and fled frantically. Too long, and the rest didn't catch up. "It seems like they're dead." Thinking to this point, he rushed even more desperately. When he finally arrived at the meeting point, he saw that there were already dozens of men in black gathered there. Each of them was holding a woman in red. Someone asked suspiciously, "Officer Ding, why are you alone? Where are the others?" "Run. Run quickly," Officer Ding shuddered. An old man in black said in a deep voice, "Speak clearly. Why are you running? Could it be that the enemy is attacking?" The former immediately told him everything that had happened to Yi Chen. "If it's really as you said, this person must be a cultivator, and he's at the innate stage." The old man in black's expression turned grim as he sneered. "However, so what if that's the case? With me here, I'll be able to kill him." At the next moment, 2 figures suddenly walked out of the void. Officer Ding was scared out of his wits when he saw the white-haired Yi Chen. "It's him! It's him!" Tearing space! The old man in black's expression changed drastically as he inhaled sharply. "This person can actually tear space apart. He must be an Emperor stage. Cultivator." He took out a rescue talisman and shot it into the sky as he thought to this point. Then he looked at Yi Chen and threatened. "Senior, the Divine Wind Sect, a grade 9 sect of Dakuin, is guarding 50 kilometers away from here. I hope you won't." Bang, bang, bang. Dozens of bloody mists exploded in the air. Yi Chen grabbed through the air and grabbed the unconscious Cui Hua over. He handed it to old Zhang. Then he grabbed through the air. Countless spiritual energy gathered into a golden sword in his hand. "Take this sword back with you. It can protect your safety. If you encounter any danger, just say the word, and I can kill all living beings within a radius of 3,000 meters. I'll come back for you guys after I'm done." With that, he headed straight for the Divine Wind Sect. Old Zhang was stunned on the spot. He stared blankly at Yi Chen's retreating figure. The shock in his heart could not dissipate even now. What kind of person did the father and daughter save? The Grade 9 sect, the Divine Wind Sect, was one of the few Grade 9 sects in the entire Dakuin dynasty. The sect had over 10,000 disciples, countless resources, and 3 martial saints. At this moment, within the Divine Wind Sect, the Divine Wind sect master leaped into the air and frowned as he looked at the fireworks that exploded in the sky. A rescue talisman? Could it be that the powerhouses of the Daluo dynasty have arrived? Right at this moment, a white-haired man descended from the sky. His white hair fluttered in the wind, and his gaze was terrifying. "Who are you?" The Divine Wind sect master's pupils constricted. Subsequently, 2 old figures tore through the air and arrived. They were the only 2 martial saints left in the Divine Wind sect. Seeing that the young man did not say a word, the Divine Wind sect master shouted, "How dare you barge into my Divine Wind sect? leave your life here." A huge hand suddenly appeared in the air. It turned into 1,000 meters tall and descended from the sky, directly drowning the entire Divine Wind sect. Tens of thousands of disciples died. Even the 3 martial saints, including the Divine Wind sect's sect master, were destroyed. He killed a sect with a raise of his hand. Yi Chen's expression was extremely calm. He turned around and rushed toward Linen County. The killing intent in his eyes intensified. He was going to massacre Dakuin today. End of this chapter. Chapter 1164. East Jiang Village, Zhangji Iron Shop's entrance. The original iron shop had long since been buried in the fire, leaving behind only ruins and the pungent smell of smoke. Old Zhang knelt on the ground as if he had lost his soul. Beside him lay the unconscious Cui Hua. On the way back with his daughter, he saw corpses all along the way. Countless houses were buried in the fire. Dead, they're all dead. Old Zhang tightly held the golden sword in his hand, his body trembling nonstop. More than 300 people in East Jiang Village, regardless of whether they were men or women, old or young, were all killed by the mysterious group of black-clothed men. Not a single person was left alive. Zhang Yuanwei's death was not to be regretted. The only thing that made him sad was old Yuan, who sold bamboo baskets in the east of the village, Shizhen, who liked to come and drink wine, and the widow next door, whose man died in the army. Those familiar faces were now nothing but cold corpses, which kept pounding into his mind. Old Zhang, who was over 50 years old, had sleepy eyes. He actually hugged his head, squatted down, and cried bitterly. What did we do wrong? Why do we have to suffer like this? He bent his legs and knelt on the ground. East Jiang Village was his home, but now his home was no longer there. Those distant relatives and neighbors of the past were all dead, leaving only the father and daughter. At this time, an incomparably weak voice came from behind him. "Father." Old Zhang hurriedly wiped his tears and turned to look at Cui Hua, who had just woken up. He squeezed out a stiff smile from his face. "Daughter, are you all right?" Cui Hua seemed to be at a loss. After looking around, a trace of clarity returned to her eyes. "Father, why am I here? Wasn't I taken away by someone? And you, aren't you?" She covered her mouth and looked at old Zhang, her eyes filled with disbelief. She clearly remembered that her father's hands and feet had been cruelly chopped off by that group of people, so why was he standing in front of her now? Father wears blockhead. A thought suddenly flashed through her mind, and then she suddenly looked at the ruins behind her, her body trembling violently. Moo. Blockhead. After saying that, she rushed into the ruins. Old Zhang hurriedly pulled her back and sighed softly. "Your blockhead is not dead, but—" "Then where is he?" "But what?" Faced with Cui Hua's loss of control, old Zhang's heart was slightly stifled. His expression was incomparably complicated as he narrated the events in full detail. After a long while, the night fell into a deathly silence, leaving only the father and daughter facing each other in silence. "Father, you lied to me, didn't you?" Cui Hua felt as if she had been struck by lightning, her mind rumbling endlessly. What did she hear? Not only was her wooden block not burned to death by the fire, but it also recovered its memory and became normal. It even killed those mysterious people and healed her father's limbs. Old Zhang knew that it was hard for her to accept it for a while, so it was worth it to stand aside and wait for her to digest it. In fact, how could he accept it? Even though he had seen everything with his own eyes, he still felt like he was in a dream. In reality, people like Yi Chen were too far away from ordinary people like them. They were so far away that they could only live in the myth that the neighbors bragged about. After an unknown amount of time, Cui Hua sat on the ground with a dazed expression. She bit her lip and said, "Father, you said Blockhead is an immortal." Maybe. Old Zhang took a deep breath in and subconsciously tightened his grip on the golden sword in his hand. At this moment, the ground began to tremble faintly, as if there were thousands of troops and horses galloping over. under the father and daughter's terrified expressions. They saw a large number of armored and halberd-wielding troops surging over. Old Zhang instinctively protected his daughter behind him, holding the golden sword tightly in his hand. He did not know if the golden sword could really protect them, but it was their only hope. Enemy. This is the enemy's army. When he saw the armor and black flags worn by the army, old Zhang became even more nervous. When he was young, he had been to Lin County. On the streets, he had seen the soldiers of the enemy Daluo dynasty being paraded through the streets. The Daluo dynasty's army suddenly stopped. The vanguard pointed at old Zhang and his daughter. "General, there are people here. Take them down." As an indifferent voice rang out, more than a dozen people rushed toward the father and daughter with a ferocious aura. Old Zhang extended the golden sword in his hand by instinct. His body was trembling as he tried his best to recall the method of use that Yi Chan had told him before he left. Wait! Right at this moment, an old voice suddenly came from the army. There was a trace of fear in the voice. At the next moment, a purple-clothed old man suddenly leaped out and walked slowly to old Zhang and his daughter. He stared at the golden sword. "Sir, don't be nervous." Seemingly seeing old Zhang's nervousness, the purple-clothed old man smiled and said, "I'm from the Daluo dynasty. I won't hurt you commoners. I'm just asking a few simple questions." Old Zhang looked at him warily. The purple-clothed old man was not angry. He took a deep look at the golden sword in his hand and said fearfully, "May I ask who gave you this sword?" He was a member of the Daluo dynasty's martial Saint Mountain, and he had been worshipped by Daluo for generations. This time, he had followed the army to deal with the martial saint of Dakuin. According to common sense, a commoner like old Zhang wouldn't be able to enter his eyes at all, and he wouldn't let him appear in person. However, it was all because of the golden sword in old Zhang's hand. It gave him a three-revolution martial saint, a creepy feeling. It seemed to be the might of an emperor stage. He had a feeling that once old Zhang activated the golden sword, he and the army of 100,000 behind him would probably be annihilated. That was why he showed up in time to stop it. Old Zhang said in a threatening manner, "This was given to me by my son-in-law." Son-in-law, the purple-clothed old man narrowed his eyes. Even though he did not believe old Zhang's words, he still said, "Sir, you can leave now." With that, he leaped back into the army. "Let's go." The army set off once again. In the eyes of old Zhang and his daughter, they headed south in an orderly manner. Old Zhang only snapped out of his daze when they were far away. He could not believe that the enemy's army would not kill them. He looked at the golden sword in his hand, thoughtfully and subconsciously tightened his grip. Amidst the army, a luxurious carriage was escorted by the crowd as it advanced forward. As the commander of the army, Liang Wu urged his horse forward and rode alongside the carriage. He could not help but ask, "Elder Wu, why did you let those two people go?" Although Liang Wu was the commander-in-chief of this expedition, his tone was very courteous. This was because even the current emperor had to show some respect to the existence in the carriage. It was also the god in their hearts. After a few seconds, the purple-clothed old man's voice came from the carriage. "General Liang, did you see the golden sword in that old man's hand?" End of this chapter. Chapter 1165. Liang Wu nodded slightly and couldn't help but narrow his eyes. "Elder Wu, could it be that there's something wrong with that golden sword?" "This sword has a hint of Emperor's aura. I'm guessing that it belongs to an Emperor's throne expert." The words of the violet-clothed old man caused Liang Wu to be repeatedly shocked in his heart. If all of you had wanted to kill those two earlier and force the golden sword to activate, then I can guarantee that all the living beings in an area of 3 kilometers would have been annihilated, and even I would have died. What? An Emperor's throne strong practitioner? Liang Wu's mind went blank. He knew very well what an Emperor's throne practitioner represented, because in the entire central prefecture, Every emperor's throne expert was either the ruler of a country or the leader of a holy land. Even so, there had never been an emperor's throne expert in the Daluo dynasty and the Great Kuan dynasty since ancient times. An emperor's throne expert has appeared in the Great Kuan realm. I wonder if it will affect our Zenith Heaven's plan to attack the Great Kuan realm. The purple-robed old man was worried. Then he changed the topic and said, "By the way, I remember that the Great Kuan dynasty's Divine Wind sect is stationed 50 kilometers away from here." "Not bad." Liang Wu nodded and said with some fear, "Old Wu, should we take a detour?" As a grand heavenly immortal, he had also heard rumors about the Divine Wind sect. It was said that this sect was one of the few ninth-grade sects in the Great Kuan realm, and there were even 3 martial saints in the sect. No. The purple-robed old man smiled faintly. 800 years ago, this old man was defeated by the Divine Wind sect's sect master, Feng Baixiu. Since I'm passing by today, this old man would like to experience it for myself. Let's go straight to the Divine Wind sect. An hour later, at the abandoned site of the Divine Wind sect, Liang Wu and the purple-robed old man stared at the ruins in front of them in disbelief. Their eyes were filled with deep shock. This was because a palm print had appeared in the ruins in front of them. It was as if a giant palm had slammed down from the sky and directly destroyed the entire Divine Wind sect. The Divine Wind sect that had once shaken the Great Kuan and Zenith Heaven realms and was even infamous in the Central Plains had been destroyed. A strong practitioner of the Emperor's throne. He must be a strong practitioner of the Emperor's throne. The purple-robed elder's lips trembled as he muttered, "I was right. Only a strong practitioner of the Emperor's throne can destroy a sect." While Liang Wu, who was beside him, was shocked, wild joy surged into his heart. Looks like this Emperor's throne realm expert has enmity with Dakuan. I wonder who he is? Could it be that Great Qin's Emperor Lord has descended? Less than 500 miles away from Lin County. Yi Qin stood in the air and sped along the way. Now that he had comprehended the concept of becoming immortal again, other than the lack of quintessential qi in his body, he was no different from a soul-forming stage cultivator. Everywhere he passed, he saw only slaughter, endless slaughter. Regardless of gender, age, or gender, everyone died under the butcher's knife. Even though these people had nothing to do with him, he still saved them in the end. As for the perpetrators, they were all killed by him. "Thank you for your kindness, immortal." Countless people in Lin and County knelt down in front of him, mixed with all kinds of helpless cries. "Head north and look for an old blacksmith in East Jiang Village. This person can protect you," Yi Qin said, and suddenly increased his speed. He took a step forward and teleported 5 kilometers away in the blink of an eye. After a few hundred breaths of time, a majestic city came into view. However, the city was already in flames and was filled with dense death energy. Outside the city, a huge altar that covered an area of hundreds of square meters had already been set up. There was a formation set up around the altar. It was like a huge black hole that was crazily tearing at the yin energy and souls between heaven and earth. At the center of the altar, women in red had their hands and feet tied as they knelt on the ground. Behind them, there were black-robed men with dark energy, torturing them with the cruelest punishment in the world. The great 1,000 ghost devouring formation required ferocious souls to guard it. Ordinary people could only turn into ghosts after death. Therefore, if one wanted to give birth to a ferocious soul, one had to torture the dead while they were alive. That way, the resentment would increase, and only after death would there be a chance to give birth to a ferocious soul. All sorts of incomparably shrill screams resounded between heaven and earth. It was like the roar of thousands of ghosts. It was a ghastly sight. As the women were tortured to death, a black-robed man extracted their souls and said with a frown, "Senior brother, they didn't capture enough women. Only one vengeful spirit was born out of nearly 300 women. If the ferocious soul doesn't come out, how can the great 1,000 ghost-devouring formation be completed? A black-robed old man's eyes were sinister. His name was Sua Ming, and he was from the Dark Hun Dynasty's Grade 9 sect, the Fallen Spirit sect. He was also the person who set up the Great 1,000 Ghost-Devouring Formation. At this moment, a man walked to his side and whispered, "Sir, we found the person you're looking for. Bring him here." Sua Ming could not help but reveal a look of ecstasy. Immediately after, a few men in black brought a petite girl in white who was only 15 or 16 years old over. The girl's mouth was gagged and her hands and feet were tied. She could only struggle with all her might, and her beautiful eyes were filled with fear. The moment he saw that person, the expression of Lin, and County's Deputy Minister, Lu Zuan, who was standing in the distance like a puppet, changed drastically. "Tong Tong!" Lu Zuan cried out in disbelief, and then he pounced over frantically. Tong Tong! The girl in front of him was his only daughter. He got his daughter at an old age and regarded her as the apple of his eye. He did not expect that she would be brought here. The moment the girl saw him, she struggled more and more intensely, and her eyes were filled with a pleading look. "Get lost!" Someone kicked Lu Ziyuan away. Lu Ziyuan screamed and knelt heavily on the ground, begging bitterly, "Sir Saw, please let my daughter go." "I have done everything you ordered." The black-robed old man laughed cruelly. "Deputy Minister Lu, I'm sorry. Your daughter is the Lady of 4 that I'm looking for. She's the most suitable to be the ferocious soul of the formation." "No." Lu Ziyuan's eyes were bloodshot. "I'm an official of the Imperial Court. You can't touch my daughter. She's only 15 years old. An official of the Imperial Court?" Sua Ming smiled disdainfully. "Since you're an official of the Imperial Court, you should know that this plan concerns the fate of the great Qin dynasty. You should sacrifice yourself for the country." Sua Ming no longer paid attention to him. After grabbing the girl in white with one hand, his fingernails directly pierced into the top of the former's skull, and he muttered, "No." Lu Ziyuan begged again and again. "Retribution. It's really retribution." He, Lu Ziyuan, once boasted that he was an honest official and loved the people like his own children. However, for the sake of his family, he had to acquiesce in the massacre of the entire county. Now the retribution was on his daughter. Noisy old man. Sua too felt noisy in his ears. His eyes turned cold, and a wisp of spiritual power turned into a poisonous scorpion and attacked Lu Ziyuan. Lu Ziyuan could not help but show despair. Just as the poisonous scorpion was about to fall on him, a purple thunderbolt fell from the sky. The purple lightning struck the scorpion's body with unerring accuracy, and the latter vanished into thin air with a loud bang. End of this chapter. Chapter 1166. Aha! Sua Ming suddenly felt a piercing headache in his mind, and then he tossed down the young woman in his hand and held his head while letting out shrill cries without end. That poisonous scorpion was an illusion created by his spiritual power. Since it was defeated, it naturally damaged his soul. Lu Ziyuan was dumbfounded. "Who's there?" The surrounding strong cultivators from Fallen Spirits sect all rushed out and surveyed their surroundings with a sinister look on their faces. The next moment, a white-haired young man descended from the sky. The young man's gaze was cold, and there was a dense, baleful aura between his brows. "Who are you? How dare you obstruct our Fallen Spirit sect?" One of the Fallen Spirit sect's Wu Zongs took a step forward and rose into the air. His expression was ferocious. Yi Chen lifted his eyes and looked around. When he saw the altar that seemed to have turned into hell, the killing intent in his eyes intensified. This person must be an expert, sent by an enemy origin immortal. One of the Fallen Spirit sect's martial kings narrowed his eyes as his killing intent surged. "Kill him!" Boom! In the blink of an eye, several powerful fighters from the Fallen Spirits sect leaped into the air and charged towards Yi Chen. The yin energy around their bodies increased exponentially. "You deserve to die!" A voice that was as cold as winter came out of Yi Chen's mouth. He scanned with his divine consciousness and immediately suppressed the surroundings like heavenly might. Bang, bang, bang! The few strong cultivators from Fallen Spirits sect who were charging towards Lin Fan had their bodies disintegrated into a mist of blood. The Fallen Spirits sect Martial King, who was the furthest away, spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was filled with shock. Who was this person? How terrifying! The killing intent in Yi Chen's eyes did not diminish. He leaped to the ground and charged at Sua Ming and the rest. Fellow Taoist, let's talk things out. Sua Ming's expression changed drastically. His heart was filled with fear as he shouted, I am the elder of the Fallen Spirits sect. Sua Ming, he thought that Yi Chen was a martial saint like him. Moreover, Yi Chen was merciless, so he had no choice but to threaten Yi Chen. Yi Chen did not even look at that person. His pressure covered the place. Then he slammed his palm down and crushed that person's body and soul directly. Devil, this person is a devil. The surrounding disciples of Fallen Spirits sect were shocked as they scrambled to escape in all directions. All of you should die. Then a mighty voice came from the sky. It was like a thunderclap that shook the heavens and the earth. In an instant, the bodies of countless people at the scene exploded, turning into a red mist that was on the verge of materializing. Throughout the entire process, Lu Ziyuan and the gagged girl watched in horror. In their eyes, Sua Ming and the others were already formidable like gods on the earth. Yet they were annihilated by this white-haired young man with a raise of his hand. While he was still in a daze, he saw the white-haired young man looking at him coldly before slowly walking over. Plop! Lu Ziyuan's body trembled violently, and then he knelt down heavily on the ground and said with a trembling voice, Minister of Lin and County, Lu Ziyuan greets the immortal. Scram! Yi Chen waved his sleeve and sent the father and daughter flying several kilometers away. At the same time, he said, the 3,000-meter forbidden area will kill anyone who enters. After saying that, he lowered his head and looked at the dense, underground spirit veins around the altar again. Spiritual qi that was visible to the naked eye reverberated between heaven and earth, as if it was trying to maintain this formation. In order to set up the 10,000 Ghost Devourer formation to intercept the Daluo dynasty's attack, the great Kuan dynasty did not hesitate to move all the spirit veins in the country here. Disregarding the lives of over 100 people to use such a sinister technique, it seems like the great Kuan dynasty shouldn't exist in this world. Yi Chen's expression was calm as he sensed the abundant spiritual energy between heaven and earth. There was a smile in his eyes instead. This spirit vein has benefited me. Perhaps I can use the spiritual energy here to break through to God transformation stage. As soon as he finished speaking, with a wave of his hand, he directly set up a defensive barrier within a radius of 3,000 meters. Then he sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. As the tip of his nose began to move rhythmically, every pore on his body moved as well. The spiritual energy between heaven and earth surged toward him at a speed visible to the naked eye, several kilometers away. As soon as Lu Ziyuan landed, he helped the white-clothed girl up. He removed the cloth from her mouth and cried tears of joy. Tong Tong, are you all right? Father, I'm fine. The father and daughter hugged their heads and cried. Clearly, they had yet to snap back to their senses from the earlier scene. After a while, the white-clothed girl looked at the huge altar a few kilometers away. Father, was that an immortal? It must be an immortal. Lu Ziyuan looked grateful. He knew very well that Yi Chen killed the people from the Fallen Spirit sect, but did not kill them. That was undoubtedly a great favor. Father, I want to be that immortal's disciple. The white-clothed girl gripped the corner of her father's shirt tightly and walked toward the altar. No. Lu Ziyuan pulled her back immediately and said with a bitter smile, that immortal said that anyone who enters the forbidden area will die. Let's go back quickly. No, I want to wait for him. The white-clothed girl was extremely stubborn. in the capital region of the great Kuan dynasty, in a gloomy palace that looked like hell. Boom, 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 with a series of explosions, countless soul tablets shattered in the fallen spirit sect. Sua Ming is dead, an old man wrapped in sinister energy suddenly said. Although he's a two-revolution martial saint, even if he encountered an enemy martial saint, he should be able to escape with his soul, right? Not necessarily. Another gloomy old man appeared and said coldly, I heard that the old man with the surname Wu from the Daluo dynasty is here too. Could it be that he attacked? It should be. The fallen spirit's sect master narrowed his eyes and said coldly, we can't afford to lose the 10,000 spirit devouring formation. Supreme Elders, it seems like we have to make a trip to Linen County. At the altar in Linen County, after the last bit of spiritual energy in the world was refined, Yichen opened his eyes slowly and mumbled, now that my true origin energy has been replenished, it's time to communicate with heaven and earth with my intent. Shattering nascent soul, he said softly and closed his eyes again. He stretched his arms, and the nascent soul in his dantian slowly dissipated. My intent is life and death. As a murmur came out of his mouth, traces of a mysterious intent spread out with him as the center. The life and death intent enveloped 30 meters, 60 meters, 300 meters, 1,500 meters, 10,000 meters in the end. It enveloped the entire Lin and county and even the entire great Kuan dynasty. At that moment, everyone in the entire great Kuan dynasty, from the cultivators to the mortals, no matter what they were doing, could sense the change. It was a wonderful feeling. It was like a blessing to the soul, but it was also like the will of heaven and earth was whispering silently. At that moment, all the mortals seemed to have sensed something and knelt in Yi Chen's direction. They could not help but worship him. On the other hand, the cultivators were extremely terrified. What they felt was an oppressive might, a will of supremacy between heaven and earth. Under such a will, they were filled with endless panic. End of this chapter. Chapter 1167. Bang, bang, bang. Countless cultivators also knelt on the ground in worship. The higher one's cultivation base was, the more they could sense the subtle changes, and the more frightened they were. At that moment, all the martial sages of the entire great Kuan dynasty came out of closed-door cultivation. Their expressions changed greatly as they felt uneasy. At the peak of the great Kuan dynasty's imperial city, an old man in a golden robe looked in the direction of Lin, and commandery and said with difficulty, Is someone trying to break through to the emperor's throne realm? Behind him, there were countless figures with powerful auras. Even the current emperor of Great Kuan was among them. As soon as his voice fell, the people behind him immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. Their expressions changed, and disbelief surged out from their eyes. An emperor's throne powerhouse was about to be born in the zenith heaven immortal realm. The son of Great Kuan stared at the golden-robed old man with boundless joy in his eyes. Patriarch, who are you? Who is it? The reason why his Great Kuan was dragged into the 100 Empire War and even had his fate manipulated by the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty was also because there were no Emperor's Throne experts in his country. If the Great Kuan had an Emperor's Throne expert, the Central Plains would definitely face a new reshuffle, and the Great Kuan would definitely rise. This pressure is too vast. The golden-robed elder stared at the direction of Linen County. This person is in the north. Who is he? Gather everyone and come with me. He pointed in the direction of Linen County and said, This person is in the critical period of breaking through. It's fine if he's from Dakuan, but if he's not, boundless killing intent swept across the world. At the same time, less than 100 miles away from Linen County, an army of up to 300,000 people was moving forward. Reporting, there's no one within a 50-kilometer radius. Reporting, there's no one within a radius of 80 li. As the scouts returned to report, Liang Wu, who was in the army, frowned even more deeply. His goal was to launch an all-out attack and completely conquer the great Kuan dynasty's Lin County. For this, he had brought 300,000 soldiers and was even prepared for a fierce battle. However, as the army pushed forward for hundreds of miles, they didn't see a single person. All they saw were corpses and a tragic scene. Out of the quality of a professional soldier, he followed the carriage in the army and whispered, "Old Wu, something is wrong. There's not a single living person in the entire Lin County. You suspect that this is De Kuan's trap?" The purple-robed elder in the carriage frowned. "There's definitely something fishy going on." Liang Wu nodded slowly. "I suggest we reorganize on the spot and send out all the scouts at the same time." At this moment, a fast horse came from the front. A scout landed on the ground and reported, "General, we've captured a few hundred people. Bring me there." Liang Wu was overjoyed. He led his men and followed after them. Only then did he realize that the so-called several hundred people were actually commoners who were fleeing from a disaster. The scout stepped forward and said, "General, I have asked. They all said that they are the people of Lin County. 2 hours ago, there were black-clothed people massacring the villages. Then why are they still alive?" Liang Wu frowned. The scout said, according to them, an immortal saved them. That immortal even told them to head north, to a place called Dongzhang Village. Immortal? The purple-robed elder who followed up smiled disdainfully, thinking that it was a lie. However, after hearing the words Dongzhang Village, his face slightly froze. Did they say what the immortal looked like? The scout said, according to them, the immortal is very powerful. They couldn't see his face clearly, but he seemed to have a head of white hair. Could this person be? The purple-robed elder squinted his eyes and couldn't help but think of the golden sword he saw in Dongzhang Village. At that moment, an incomparably wonderful artistic conception swept over and poured into everyone's heart, accompanied by a faint pressure. The purple-robed elder was startled at first. Then his expression changed drastically. This is someone trying to break through to the Emperor's throne realm. Plop, plop, plop. Under such an artistic conception, the 300,000 soldiers all knelt on the ground and uncontrollably knelt in the direction of Lin County. "Old Wu, look." Liang Wu stretched out his hand and pointed to the southern sky. The purple-robed elder hurriedly looked over and found that all the clouds in the sky were activated and surged toward the sky above Lin County. From afar, he could see that the sky above Lin County was filled with dense clouds that looked like a huge cotton candy. As expected, as expected. The purple-robed elder gasped and said with a horrified expression, "I was right. Someone is trying to break through to the Emperor's throne realm. Could it be that someone in the great Kuan realm is about to be crowned as an emperor?" Liang Wu was even more terrified. If an emperor's throne expert was born in the great Kuan dynasty, then all his efforts in the Zenith Heaven realm would be in vain. Once the emperor's throne was enraged, the world would be swept away. "General Liang, you can let the army return the way they came. I must go and take a look." The purple-robed elder took a deep breath and said. He then broke through the void and rushed toward Lin County. Lin County outside the altar. At that moment, Lu Ziyuan and his daughter had already knelt on the ground, enduring the impact of the pressure coming from the center of the altar with fear. At the next moment, the void beside them began to distort. Then, a dozen figures broke through the void and arrived. The leading person wore a golden robe and stared at the altar with his golden eyes. "Someone is trying to break through to the Emperor's throne realm." "Ha ha ha, I didn't expect the old Emperor to come. It seems like this is a big commotion." As the void shook, a hunchbacked elder tore through the void and landed on the ground. Swoosh, 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 another dozen or so figures descended. In just a few breaths, more than 30 people descended, and each of them was a martial sage expert. "All the martial sages in the great Kuan realm are here. The zenith heaven realm, purple-robed elder, who was hiding in the distance, was shocked. His gaze fell on the golden-robed elder. Even the old emperor of the great Kuan dynasty has arrived. Everyone, I know my great Kuan very well, but I've never heard of anyone who could touch the emperor's throne realm. The golden-robed elder looked at everyone and said slowly, "If the person who is breaking through inside is one of you, please make an announcement as soon as possible. Otherwise, it will be bad if there is a misunderstanding." The others did not say a word, and their eyes flickered. A cold glint flashed in the golden-robed elder's eyes, and killing intent surged like a tide. "Looks like this person is most likely not from my great Kuan dynasty." Then he took a step forward. He seemed to want to approach the altar. "You can't go in." At this moment, the white-clothed girl hurriedly said, "That senior said that anyone who enters the forbidden area will die." "Forbidden area?" The golden-robed elder smirked coldly. Then he shot his gaze towards the center of the altar and said loudly, "I am the first emperor of the great Kuan dynasty, Huyenjua. May I ask which fellow is breaking through here? Please come out and meet me." Rumble. As soon as he said that, a thunderous sound suddenly sounded above the altar. A terrifying pressure enveloped the entire altar, as if it wanted to crush it. Huyenjua's intentions were not pure. He clearly wanted Yi Qin to show himself. In reality, he wanted to destroy his breakthrough. Chapter 1168. In the middle of the altar, Yi Qin sat cross-legged on the stream. A huge, 5-colored light lotus formed around him. The light lotus enveloped him completely. When the last trace of nascent soul power disappeared, there was a translucent little light figure in his dantian. The little light figure imitated his movements and sat cross-legged in his dantian, forming a seal with both hands. At the next moment, the little light figure turned from translucent to solid. Its body gradually grew until it was no different from an ordinary person. Whether it was its facial features or temperament, it was no different from Yi Qin. At that moment, a thunderous voice suddenly exploded between heaven and earth. "I'm Huyenjua, the first emperor of the great Kuan dynasty. May I ask which fellow has broken through here? Please come out and meet me." As soon as the voice fell, the spiritual energy between heaven and earth became chaotic. It charged at Yi Chen's location like a torrent. At that moment, the primordial spirit in Yi Chen's body opened its eyes at the same time. It was like an emperor had awakened. There was no emotion in his eyes that a human should have. There was only endless coldness. His eyes were like those of a newborn baby. They were black and white without any impurities, and they carried an indescribable aura of spirituality. His gaze passed through the 5-colored lotus outside his body and saw Huyenjua and the rest who were thousands of meters away. He saw everyone in the great Kuan realm like a god looking down on the world. The path of cultivation focused on refining essence into qi, refining qi into spirit, and refining spirit into void. Soul formation was to condense a primordial spirit in one's body. As long as the primordial spirit was not destroyed, the physical body would exist forever. Once one entered soul formation, it meant that they could borrow the power of heaven and earth. "Is everyone here?" Yi Qin swept his gaze across and saw Huyenjua and the rest who were thousands of meters away from the altar. Not bad. Not a single one is left behind. I'll send all of you on your way. He stood up slowly, and the 5-colored lotus that wrapped around him cracked gently. The clouds in the sky dissipated. Emperor Brush shot out from his body. "Congratulations on breaking through to soul formation, Your Majesty. You're just a step away from ascending to the immortal world." At the same time, thousands of meters away from the altar, seeing that the phenomenon in the sky had completely dissipated, everyone present was in a state of confusion. He succeeded. Could it be that the person inside has stepped into the Emperor's throne realm? Someone narrowed his eyes, feeling uneasy. No one responded to him, because everyone present was a martial saint. Even though they were very close to the emperor's throne realm, they had never experienced breaking through to the emperor's throne realm. Ha ha ha! The golden-robed old man, Huyenjua's expression changed several times. Suddenly he let out a loud laugh. Failure! This person has failed. As soon as these words came out, the crowd turned pale. A thin old man at the scene couldn't help but narrow his eyes and say, "Why does Emperor Huyen say this?" The others all looked at him. Huyenjua was the first imperial lord of the great Kuan dynasty. He had existed for the longest time and was an 8-revolution martial saint. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was the #1 person in the great Kuan realm. It could be said that among all the martial saints present, his words were the most persuasive. Meeting everyone's gaze, Huyenjua coldly smiled and said, "Everyone, you may not know this, but this old man was fortunate enough to see a powerhouse trying to break through to the emperor's throne realm. At that time, when this person was about to succeed, a void shackle appeared in the world. This void shackle is the greatest barrier that prevents anyone from stepping into the emperor's throne realm." He seemed to be reminiscing and said, "At that time, this old man's old friend also encountered the void shackle. Unfortunately, he failed to break the void shackle and died. Emperor Huyen, you mean that this person failed to break the so-called void shackle when he broke through?" Someone was surprised. The rest of the people's eyes lit up. If they hadn't heard it with their own ears, they wouldn't have known that the process of breaking through to the emperor's throne realm was so secretive. Huyenjua shook his head slightly and sneered. This person couldn't even draw out the void shackle, let alone break it? That's why this old man concluded that he failed. Someone said with a regretful expression, "In that case, we missed a peerless opportunity to witness the birth of an emperor's throne powerhouse. Everyone, let's go in and take a good look at who is breaking through here," Huyenjua said with a faint smile. Then he took a deep breath and took the lead with a murderous look on his face. He was already sure that the person in the middle of the altar was definitely not from the Daluo dynasty, and the price was naturally death. Boom! The 30 martial saints rushed toward the center of the altar in a mighty manner. Everyone had different expressions on their faces. The white-clothed girl who stayed behind asked with a puzzled expression, "Father, what are they talking about? Did that immortal fail? I'm afraid these people are going to harm that person." Lu Ziyuan sighed to himself. Although he was not from the cultivation world, the 30 or so people present still gave him a great deal of pressure. To him, Huyenjua and the rest had the advantage in numbers. If they really wanted to harm Yichen, the latter might. Have they failed? The purple-clothed old man who was hiding in the distance narrowed his eyes and said thoughtfully, "Judging from the reactions of Huyenjua and the rest, the person who is breaking through to the emperor's throne stage is probably not from Great Kuan." The distance of 3,000 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Almost at the same time Yichen put away the emperor brush, Huyenjua and the rest landed less than 30 meters away from him. At that moment, countless eyes looked at Yichen. When they saw that the person they wanted to see was only a young man in his 20s, Huyenjua and the rest were shocked. "This person is so young? I think I'm overflowing with talent, but it took me 1,000 years to reach the martial saint stage. Even if the other party is an old monster who can maintain his appearance, he shouldn't be this young, right?" At that moment, everyone present was shocked. Yi Chen ignored their gazes. However, after glancing at the 30 or so people, he was slightly surprised. There were as many as 30 martial saints. In the Tianfengxi area where he was previously, there were only a dozen martial saints at most, and this great Kuan had double that number. This showed that it was indeed the central state. Huyenjua stared at Yi Chen for a while before saying expressionlessly, "Did you break through again just now?" "So what if I did?" Yi Chen said coldly. Huyenjua's pupils constricted slightly as he spoke again. "You look unfamiliar. I don't think you're from Great Kuan, right?" "That's right." Yi Chen nodded slightly. An old man in a black robe with a snake staff took a step forward and sneered. "So, Did you kill the people from my fallen spirits sect here? Yes, I did. Yi Qin nodded. Fellow Taoist, you're really arrogant. Huyenjua was so angry that he laughed. Since you're not from Great Kuan, you entered Great Kuan's territory to break through and killed the people from Great Kuan's fallen spirit sect. Do you think Great Kuan is a vegetable garden? End of this chapter. Chapter 1169. Following his words, cold killing intent erupted. Cold killing intent exploded at the scene as they locked onto Yi Qin. You're wrong. Yi Qin stood with his hands behind his back and shook his head as if he was disdainful. It's too much of a compliment to describe Dakuin as a vegetable garden. In my opinion, Dakuin is at most a cesspool. The people in it are filthy and smelly. What shameless boasting. You're just a piece of trash who failed to break through. How dare you be so arrogant in front of us? A thin old man sneered mercilessly. Then he moved and slapped his hand down to grab Yi Chen's head. Let me fight you! Rumble. As his palm struck, the space above Yi Chen's head showed signs of flowing backward. Then it was torn apart forcefully. However, Yi Chen did not do anything as if he did not see it. He merely lifted his head and glanced at him. Two gleams of light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Ah! The man screamed and fell to the ground with a thud. His eyes were wide open as if he had died with a grievance. How is this possible? Everyone's pupils constricted violently. One had to know that the person who attacked just now was the patriarch of the grade 8 sect, Violet Cloud Dock, in Dakuin, a second-rank martial saint. A glance. However, the white-haired young man in front of him merely glanced at him, and the patriarch of Violet Cloud Dock died on the spot. Junior brother. With a furious roar, a martial saint broke through the air. He opened his mouth and spat out a huge cauldron. He then pressed it down on Yi Qin. However, Yi Chen remained unmoved. However, a gleam flashed through his eyes again. Rumble! The cauldron, which was known as a spirit treasure, shattered. That person screamed and turned into a bloody mist. Dead silence. The world was dead silent. In just a few breaths of time, 2 martial saints had died. From the beginning to the end, they did not even see how the other party had attacked. Who exactly are you, sir? The old emperor of Dakuin dynasty, Huyenjua, sucked in a breath of cold air as he stared at Yi Qin. As an 8-revolution martial saint, he believed that he could kill the 2 people from before, but it would definitely not be as easy as Yi Qin. Thinking to this point, a thought flashed through his mind. Could it be that this person is a saint from a certain sacred ground? The person who will kill you. He then took a step forward. Lightning whizzed on his right hand as he charged at Huyenjua and the rest. Aren't you being too arrogant? Even if you have strange techniques, you're still just a martial saint trying to break through to the emperor's throne realm. Huyenjua flew into a rage. His killing intent surged out like a tidal wave. Everyone, let's attack together and kill this person. Kill him. Extract his soul and refine it. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the killing intent of the 30 martial saints surged into the sky as they attacked together. Their killing intent covered the entire sky. Die. One of them opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of golden light that slashed towards Yi Futian. It was a golden flying sword that let out a tiger's roar that could cut through the sea. Clang! Yi Qin flicked his finger and forcefully crushed the golden sword. The broken pieces shot back and shattered the other party's body instantly. Kill! The 2 martial saints charged over. Their hands covered the sky and shook the world. They seemed to want to beat Yi Qin, who had his back to them, into meat paste. Both of them were 5th Revolution martial saints. In the Great Kuan realm, their combat prowess could be ranked in the top 10. Ultimate Emperor shocks the world. Huyenjua let out a long roar. 9 extremely sharp and overbearing golden dragon chi made the sun lose its color. They surged at Yi Qin, clearly trying to distract Yi Chen. Yi Chen remained unmoved in the face of the attacks from the two people behind him. Instead, he extended his palm and clenched it at the 9 dragon chi from afar. Rumble! As the sky shook violently, the 9 golden dragon chi were actually annihilated into thin air by his grasp. Ugh! Huyenjue could not help but spit a mouthful of blood. Die! At the same time, the 2 Fifth Revolution martial saints who attacked from behind him charged at him. Their hands were almost about to land on Yi Chen's head. The 2 of them could not help but sneer. At that moment, they did not know if it was an illusion, but they realized that a strand of white hair had fallen from Yi Chen's shoulder. Ah! This strand of white hair grew with the wind, and like a heavenly sword, it instantly chopped off their heads, annihilating even their souls. What technique is this? Some of the martial saints who were participating in the battle were extremely shocked. He killed 2 martial saints with just a strand of hair. Rumor has it that an emperor's throne powerhouse can make the sea boil with a drop of blood essence, and a strand of hair can kill an army. An emperor's throne powerhouse. This person is an emperor's throne powerhouse. Everyone couldn't help but tremble, as if they had seen something terrifying. Who exactly are you? Huyenjue felt a chill run from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. Earlier, he thought that Yi Chen had failed to break through. However, the other party's few simple techniques had mercilessly wiped out the only fantasy in his heart. I told you I'm the one who killed you. Yi Chen's expression did not change as he charged at him directly. Huyenjue retreated and roared. Senior, I'm the first emperor of the Great Kuan dynasty. I, Great Kuan, am a subordinate of the Great Yin dynasty. I know the emperor of the Great Yin, Di Xianxiang. The emperor of the Great Yin dynasty, Di Xianxiang, was a famous emperor's throne powerhouse in Zhongzhou. Then you deserve to die even more. Yi Chen pressed forward step by step, and the coldness in his eyes intensified. The Great Yin dynasty. If the emperor's throne powerhouse of the Great Yin dynasty had not launched a sneak attack and thrown him into the void rift, how could his body have been crushed by the violent void storm? How could he have been left in Zhongzhou with serious injuries, sealed off his 6 senses, and become a fool in the eyes of others? If it was not the Great Yin dynasty, how could he have been separated from his daughter? Since he wanted revenge, he would start with a bloodbath in Great Kuan. This was just the beginning, not the end. No, in the face of life and death, Huyenjue's entire cultivation base erupted, and a shocking saber gleam suddenly shot out from his body. The saber gleam was like a waterfall, and it was a vast expanse of whiteness. It was as if endless saber intent covered this world, shocking everyone. Final struggle. Yi Chen scoffed coldly. He waved his sleeve and forcefully dispelled the saber intent that filled the sky. When he turned around, he saw Huyenjue and the other martial saints using this opportunity to break through the void and escape into the distance. Yi Chen stretched out his hand, and his palm swept across the sky. It was like a majestic mountain ridge that stretched for a radius of 3,000 meters, controlling everything. Ah! The figures of Huyenjue and the rest appeared in the sky. When nearly 30 people saw the palm that swept past their heads, they were all shocked to death. End of this chapter. Chapter 1170. Father, W, look at that. What's that? At the same time, the white-clothed girl on the ground stiffened, and her beautiful eyes looked at the sky in disbelief. Lu Ziyuan subconsciously raised his head, and his whole body suddenly froze. He saw a scene that he would never forget in his life. It was a huge hand that stretched for several kilometers. From afar, it looked like an upside-down galaxy. The technique of an emperor's throne powerhouse. The purple-clothed old man who was hiding in the dark looked at the huge hand that could collapse the sky. His face was filled with shock. This is the technique of an emperor's throne powerhouse. An emperor's throne powerhouse was the peak of the ancient desolate realm. A single roar could shatter mountains and rivers. They were invincible and looked down on the world. He did not expect to witness it with his own eyes today. Bang, 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 bang. Practically in that instant, bursts of bloody mist burst out in succession in the void, followed by the appearance of several strange phenomena. A phenomenon from the heavens. This was the sign of a saint's fall. No, I can't accept this. Huyen Jue spat blood repeatedly after witnessing the martial saints around him being killed by Yi Chen's hand. He separated, roared, and fled. As the first emperor of the great Kuan dynasty, I swear to step into the legendary emperor's throne. I want to see the great Kuan dynasty advance to the great Kuan dynasty. I can't die. Rumble! Yi Chen's hand extended again. It extended 5 kilometers away, directly. It was really like a majestic dragon surging in the sky. Bang! As the hand ascended, it directly slapped Huyen Jue down from the sky, forcefully slapping him deep into the ground, causing the mountain range to be reduced to flat ground. At that moment, a soul shot out from where Huyen Jue had fallen, as if it wanted to escape. Can you escape? Yi Chen mumbled softly. He took a step forward and traversed several kilometers in the blink of an eye. Emperor, save me, save me. Huyen Jue's soul was hysterical. Boom! In an instant the space shook. A giant hand slapped down from the sky, aiming at Yi Chen. You finally can't help but attack. Yi Chen's eyes turned cold, and his killing intent was shocking. Do you think you can do this to me a second time? Break. In the next moment, he charged toward the giant hand and threw a punch with his right hand. Rumble. A loud bang shook heaven and earth. The space collapsed. The arm collapsed under Yi Chen's punch. It's you. Even so, there was still a gasp in the void, and it seemed to be extremely surprised. Yi Chen's voice was mighty. Great Yin's Emperor Lord. Di Xuanxian, I'll remember you. I'll kill my way into your great Yin sooner or later. I'll be waiting for you. Following a cold snort, the void returned to its previous tranquility. It was as if the previous exchange was just a dream. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, Ing, who was wearing a black dragon robe, turned into a giant and attacked a golden shadow. His murderous aura soared into the sky. Di Xianbing, how dare you get distracted while fighting me? Yi Chen grabbed Huyen Jue's astral body and grinned, revealing his white teeth. Look, even the Emperor's throne powerhouse behind you can't save you. Senior, let me go, let me go. I, De Kuan, can submit to you. I'm willing to be your loyal servant. Huyen Jue was in despair. Before he could finish speaking, Yi Chen closed his palm gently. Dust scattered with the wind. An emperor's throne powerhouse is so terrifying. The purple-clothed old man who was watching from the side trembled. Yi Chen glanced at Lu Ziyuan and his daughter, who were on the ground. Then he looked at the southeast corner in disdain. Have you seen enough? At that moment, the purple-clothed old man felt an earth-shattering thunder rumble in his ears, causing him to vomit blood repeatedly. He could not care less about the shock inside of him. He leaped out immediately and knelt before Yi Chen respectfully. Wu Gaomin of the Daluo dynasty's martial Saint Mountain greets the emperor. He had never thought of running away. It was because the tragic fate of Huyen Jue and the rest was right before his eyes. If an emperor's throne powerhouse wanted to kill a person, he would not be able to escape even if he went to heaven or hell. Daluo dynasty? Yi Chen frowned. Wu Gaomin placed his head on the ground and said in a trembling voice, Sovereign Lord, my Zenith Luo and Zenith Kuan are enemies. In this 100 Empire War, my Zenith Luo is backed by the Great Qin Dynasty, and Zenith Kuan is backed by the Great Yin Dynasty. By Empire War? Great Qin Dynasty? Yi Chen came to a realization and said, Who is the ruler of the Great Qin Dynasty? What's the 100 Empire War about? Due to the fact that he had sealed his 6 senses during this period of time, he spent most of his time in a daze. He did not know much about the outside world, and he knew even less about Zhongzhou. Wu Gaomin did not dare to raise his head to look at his dignity, nor did he dare to hide anything. Emperor, you might not know this, but half a month ago, the great Qin dynasty's ruler, Ingyu, attacked Zhongzhou and established the great Qin dynasty. He united the Demon region and the entire southern region to invade Zhongzhou. It was also the great Qin dynasty's ruler who started the 100 Empire War in Zhongzhou. From then on, the ancient desolate realm fell into chaos. Hearing that, Yi Chen's eyes flickered. He shook his head lightly and said, "It's indeed Ing." Even though he was mentally prepared, he did not expecting to play such a big game of chess, directly messing up the entire situation in Zhongzhou. He became the ruler of the great Qin dynasty. Could it be that he has also stepped into the emperor's throne stage? Could it be that he found his avatar? Thinking to this point, he slowly retracted the pressure on Wu Gaomin and landed beside the ladder. Wu Gaomin raised his head subconsciously and he was shocked. His eyes were filled with disbelief. At first glance, he thought that Yi Chen was very young. He could not believe that such a young person was an emperor's throne powerhouse. At second glance, he felt that Yi Chen was a little familiar. Immediately after, his expression changed slightly as a thought flashed through his mind. He suddenly remembered the portrait that the great Qin dynasty's envoy had given him before he came. The man in the portrait was exactly the same. Could he be the person the great Qin dynasty's envoy was looking for? Yi Chen could not help but be surprised when he saw the former staring at him. "You know me?" "No." Wu Gaomin hurriedly shook his head. "How could I know someone like the great Qin dynasty's ruler? However, you seem to be the person the great Qin dynasty's ruler is looking for." "Ing is looking for me?" Yi Chen could not help but laugh. Then he said, while smiling, "However, it coincides with my thoughts. Coincidentally, I also want to know what's going on in the Tianfeng area." He was very worried about his daughter. Even though he had killed all the martial saints in the Tianfeng area, the greatly Emperor Shang Wudao was still alive. With Mu Kai Wei and the rest's abilities, they would definitely not be able to deal with him. Thinking to this point, his eyes narrowed slightly, and a cold gleam surged in his pupils. "Greatly Emperor, I'd like to see who can protect you this time." P.S. Chapter 3 has been updated for today. End of this chapter. Chapter 1171. In the ancestral hall of the Great Kuan Dynasty. The ancestors of the Great Kuan Dynasty were enshrined here. Regardless of whether they were alive or dead, they would leave a soul tablet here to be enshrined. The Emperor of Great Kuan led the many powerhouses and looked at the shattered soul tablets in the ancestral hall in fear. The shattering of the soul tablet meant that the person on it was dead. The second-generation Emperor of Great Kuan, Huyen Lai, is dead. The third-generation Emperor of Great Kuan, Huyen Sun, is dead. The fifth-generation Emperor of Great Kuan, Huyen Lei, is dead. The first-generation Emperor of Great Kuan, Huyen Zhuo, is dead. With a series of crackling explosions, the highest row of soul tablets at the top of the ancestral hall exploded. "Dead, dead," Huyen Qing, the Emperor of Great Kuan, revealed a look of disbelief. "How is this possible? How is this possible? How could the old emperor die?" The first-generation emperor was the one who founded the Great Kuan Dynasty. His strength was also known as the #1 person in Great Kuan, and he was the closest to the legendary emperor's throne powerhouse. Now, even his soul tablet had shattered. "No, I don't believe it." The Emperor of Great Kuan roared repeatedly, his expression filled with anger and ruthlessness. "Investigate, investigate ruthlessly. Even if I have to use all the power of Great Kuan, I'll tear this thief into pieces." "Yes." Behind him, a dozen or so voices with powerful auras responded in a heavy tone. Then they were about to rush out. Rumble. Right at this moment, a foot descended from the sky and stepped on the Great Kuan Imperial Palace like a giant splitting the ground. All sorts of screams rang out in the ancestral hall. Some people tried to rush out, but it was too late. That foot was simply too big, and it directly enveloped the entire Great Kuin imperial palace. The Great Kuin imperial family was destroyed. The remaining dozen or so martial saints of Great Kuin were dead. In the air, Yi-Chen slowly retracted his right foot. He looked at the purple-clothed old man, Wu Gaomin, who was shocked calmly. "Treat this foot as a gift from me to Ying." In Dongzhang village, the sky gradually brightened. The sun rose from the other side of the mountain, trying to illuminate the entire land. However, in contrast, Eastjiang village was bleak. Broken fences and dilapidated walls could be seen everywhere, as well as the ashes of the fire. Old Zhang led the hundreds of people from Lin and county who had escaped to Dongzhang village and began to repair their temporary residence. "It's too tragic." This was old Zhang's only remaining thought. He did not sleep for the entire night. First, he led his men to search every house, trying to find any survivors. However, all he saw were cold and familiar corpses. In other words, the father and daughter were the only survivors in Eastjiang village. As for the hundreds of people who were begging for help, after a night of hard work, coupled with the excessive shock, they were already starving to the point where their limbs were weak. Left with no other choice, he could only find some food elsewhere. Fortunately, there was still half a storehouse of grain left in Squire Zhang's residence. It could be considered as temporarily solving the problem of eating for everyone. The things that troubled ordinary people were nothing more than clothing, food, shelter, and transportation. For refugees, as long as they had something to eat and a place to temporarily stay, they would be satisfied. But what should he do next? Old Zhang knew nothing. After experiencing so many disasters in one night, he was already numb. The only thought in his mind was to survive. When he thought of this, he could not help but glance at his daughter, who was sitting at the entrance of the village and staring blankly at the north. He looked at the half-eaten biscuit in his hand and walked over hesitantly. "Daughter, have some." Cui Hua remained unmoved, like a stone statue. After a while, she said faintly, "Father, do you think Blockhead will come back?" Through the refugee's narration, she had completely accepted that the so-called Blockhead had immortal-like means. Yes, he will definitely come back. Looking at his daughter's eager gaze, old Zhang felt a little suffocated. He comforted her in a hoarse voice and turned around to make other arrangements. "Blockhead!" his daughter exclaimed. He turned his head to look by instinct and saw his daughter stand up and run toward the entrance of the village in high spirits. There, a young man with white hair and green stood slowly. He had a smile on his face, and his green clothes fluttered in the wind. "Blockhead!" Cui Hua wanted to hug Yi-Chen excitedly when she got closer. However, she seemed to have thought of something subsequently and stopped in her tracks. She knew that the person before her was not the Blockhead from the past, but the immortal that her father and the rest were talking about. She was not worthy of an immortal. Yi-Chen smiled faintly. He walked over and patted her shoulder lightly. "I'm relieved that you and your daughter are fine." Cui Hua's eyes dimmed. She then looked at Yi-Chen in a daze and forced a smile. "Have you really recovered your memory?" "That's right." Yi-Chen nodded lightly and said, "My surname is Yi, and my name is Chen. I ended up here because I was injured by an enemy." "Enemy?" Cui Hua's expression changed slightly as she said nervously, "Is that enemy of yours very powerful?" Although she had never seen Yi-Chen's means, her father and the rest called him an immortal. Did that mean that the immortal's enemy was also an immortal? "It's all right." Yi-Chen shook his head with a smile. "Immortal? Benefactor." At this moment, many refugees in ragged clothes rushed over from the village. When they were less than 30 meters away from him, they knelt down in unison, extremely grateful. If Yi-Chen had not saved them on the way to Lin and County, they would have died long ago. "Everyone, please rise." Yi-Chen raised his hand, and everyone realized that they could not help but stand up. They were even more shocked. He swept his gaze across and looked at the helpless and sorrowful faces. He could not help but sigh softly. Your family died in the flames of war. I sympathize with you, but things will be different from now on." At the next moment, Wu Gaomin landed on the ground from the void. Yi Qin glanced at Wu Gaomin and said, "This is an immortal from the Daluo dynasty. He knows the emperor of Daluo. Daluo is about to attack Great Kuan. I believe that he will treat you well after he unifies Great Kuan." No one said a word in the face of his comfort. They only looked at Wu Gaomin in disbelief. Meeting everyone's gaze, Wu Gaomin nodded slightly and said, "I can guarantee that when my Daluo army enters the country in the future, they will not bully you. I, the Emperor of Daluo, love the people and will treat you well. I will redistribute the land and give you cattle, tax exemptions, and other policies." Cheers came from the crowd. Yi Qin watched silently. He was not a saint. That was all he could do for these ordinary people. Fortunately, through his conversation with Wu Gaomin along the way, he learned that the Daluo dynasty was different from Great Kuan. He believed that after these people became Daluo citizens, they would have a better life. Zhangji Iron Shop in a temporary shed. Yi Qin could not help but sigh as he looked at the dilapidated walls around him. He had lived here for almost a month. Before he woke up, he had treated this place as his home. Thinking to this point, he could not help but bow to old Zhang and his daughter. "Thank you for taking care of me all this time." End of this chapter. Chapter 1172. During the days when he was injured, it was old Zhang who saved him. It was also old Zhang's family who treated him like a family member. Even though Yi Qin could still recover without all of that, he still owed the other party a favor after all. How could he, Yi Qin, be an ungrateful person? "What are you doing?" Old Zhang was shocked by his sudden action and waved his hands repeatedly. I can't," to him. Yi Qin was an immortal. It was a blessing that he had cultivated for several lifetimes to be able to save an immortal. "Of course." Yi Qin lifted his eyes and said with a smile after bowing to the end, "In return, I can fulfill 3 of your requests." "What requests?" Old Zhang could not react at the moment. Before Yi Qin could speak, Cui Hua, who was next to him, looked at him and suddenly said, "Are you leaving?" Yi Qin said, "That's right." Naturally, he would not stay here. Putting aside the fact that this was not his homeland, he still had to look for his daughter, Yuhan, and his parents. Although she was mentally prepared, Cui Hua still felt a lump in her throat after hearing Yi Qin's affirmative answer. She took a deep breath in and pretended to be strong as she said, "We don't want anything. I just want you to remember me and Dad." Although she said that, there were still tears at the corner of her eyes. She did not allow herself to show her weak side. Old Zhang secretly sighed when he heard that. Yi Qin fell into silence for a few seconds. He then looked at the golden sword in old Zhang's hand. "Give me this sword!" As soon as the golden sword landed in his hand, he extended his hand and extracted a trace of bloodline power from Cui Hua's body. As he formed a seal with both hands, the bloodline power completely merged with the golden sword. "Keep this sword." Yi Qin passed the golden sword to old Zhang again. "If your descendants are in danger of being exterminated, use the Zhang family's bloodline to activate this sword. As soon as this sword is unsheathed, it can kill everything within a radius of 3,000 meters. However, you can only use it 3 times. Don't use it unless it's a critical moment. Remember this." He waved his sleeve, and a few bottles of medicinal pills and a cultivation method landed in old Zhang's hand. The medicinal pills in the bottle are divided into innate pills and some medicinal pills that can improve the human body's potential. The innate pills can allow you and your daughter to live for 100 years. Without waiting for the father and daughter to speak, he continued, "As for that cultivation technique, it's called the 3000 style sky shaking hammer technique. It's tailor-made for the 2 of you to forge iron. You can cultivate it, and you can also pass it down to your descendants. However, you must know that a man's wealth is his own ruin. His series of actions caused old Zhang and his daughter to be incomparably shocked, and by the time they recovered from their shock, there was no one in front of them. Blockhead! Cui Hua's tears could no longer be held back as they rushed out. Unfortunately, it was still to no avail. Old Zhang looked at the thing in his hand with a heavy heart. A few seconds later he bowed to the sky. He knew very well how great of an opportunity Yi Chen had given the father and daughter. It was also because of this opportunity that their Zhang family would definitely prosper. Yi Chen looked at the father and daughter on the ground from 100 meters in the air. There was a hint of relief in his eyes. The rise and fall of fate is the heavenly Tao. He murmured, then said to Wu Gaomin, "Let's go." What he didn't know was that after he left, Cui Hua still didn't give up searching for him. Unfortunately, they never saw Yi Chen again until the day the father and daughter died of old age. On the other hand, their descendants had an inexplicable fate with Yi Chen. The moment Yi Chen left Dakuin, the Daluo dynasty, which had received the news long ago, sent their army to besiege Dakuin. In less than 3 days, Dakuin fell completely and became a vassal of the Daluo dynasty. Meanwhile, the Daluo emperor treated the people of Dakuin well according to Yi Chen's wishes. Especially in Dongzhang village, old Zhang became the village chief under the election of the new villagers and renamed Dongzhang village to Immortal Village. In the capital of the Daluo dynasty, Chongjing City, Yi Chen walked on the noisy street in green clothes. He lifted his head and looked at both sides of the street. He realized that there were countless peddlers selling their goods. Many scholars in simple clothes walked in and out in groups. It was a peaceful scene. He had to admit that compared to Dakuin, the Daluo dynasty was much smaller. He could tell that the two emperors had different methods. Wu Gaomin followed, closely by his side. The dignified martial saint was like a personal servant, introducing the customs of Dakuin to him. Yi Chen nodded from time to time. Just when he was about to continue walking, he suddenly heard a commotion behind him. The ground that was paved with green bricks began to shake violently. Countless people standing in the middle of the road scrambled to dodge to the sides. Rumble! The shaking became more and more intense. Everyone subconsciously looked over and saw a black torrent of steel surging over from the end of the street. It was mixed with a monstrous, ferocious aura. As the black torrent approached, the clouds above everyone's heads were covered by the murderous aura. It blotted out the sky and the sun. It was terrifying. As the black torrent approached, a black and ferocious flag appeared before everyone's eyes. Yi. On the fluttering flag, the word Yi could be faintly seen. It seemed to want to stir the wind and clouds. At that moment, Wu Gaomin, who was next to Yi Chen, had a slight change in expression. He secretly exclaimed, "It's the Great Qin's envoy, the Black Dragon Guards. It's his Black Dragon Guards." The Great Qin's envoy? Yi Chen narrowed his eyes. He had heard from Wu Gaomin that the Great Qin's envoy seemed to have been looking for him. However, for some reason, he felt that there was a faint, familiar aura in the black torrent. Rumble. As the black torrent approached, everyone could clearly see that it was a group of people in black armor. The armor was airtight, revealing only pairs of bloodthirsty and ferocious eyes. "Emperor, I think we should retreat." Wu Gaomin could not help but say. As the master of Zenith Heaven, the Great Qin dynasty naturally had a high status in Zenith Heaven. No one dared to provoke them. However, Yi Chen did not move at all. At the next moment, just as the steel torrent was about to collide with the two of them, it suddenly stopped. Its movements were neat and uniform. Within this group of thousands of people with astonishing murderous aura, the most ferocious and monstrous murderous aura swept out. When everyone saw the figure clearly, they were shocked to discover that it was a young man in black armor. The young man's fierce eyes swept across everything, looking disdainful and domineering. Everyone's gazes landed on the young man. Their eyes were filled with shock, and even Wu Gaomin was no exception. Even though it was a young man, he still felt a trace of cold danger from him. One had to know that he was a Fifth Revolution martial saint. Yi Chen stared at the young man in black. His initially calm gaze was slightly stunned. Subsequently, a hint of shock and not knowing whether to laugh or cry surged on his face. End of this chapter. Chapter 1173. Why is that young man still blocking the way? He's the Great Qin's envoy, the Black Dragon King. That young man is in trouble. On both sides of the road, countless people pointed at Yi Chen and discussed. Many of them had pity and sympathy on their faces. Subsequently, everyone saw the young man in black with a monstrous, murderous aura walk toward Yi Chen and the young man. Wu Gaomin felt very uneasy. He only knew that the Great Qin's envoy, the Black Dragon King, was looking for Yi Chen, but he did not know why. Was it an enemy or a friend? He could not help but take a deep breath in as he thought to this point. He took a few steps forward and cupped his fists. Master Black Dragon King. However, the young man in black did not even look at him from the beginning until the end. He walked past him and eventually arrived before Yi Chen. The young man's slightly ferocious eyes met Yi Chen's calm gaze. At that moment, the atmosphere seemed a little cold. Wu Gaomin's heart sank. Just when he was about to speak, he saw the young man in black suddenly kneel before Yi Chen, causing the ground to shake violently. The young man looked at Yi Chen in a daze. His cold, emotionless eyes were moist at that moment. "Master." A slightly hoarse and excited voice slowly came out of his mouth. Everyone was so shocked that they couldn't react for a moment. "And Master?" Wu Gaomin was so shocked that his eyeballs almost popped out. The Great Qin's envoy, the Black Dragon King, whom even the Emperor of Daluo had to respect, actually called Yi Chen his master? Yi Chen looked at the young man, kneeling before him quietly. He took a good look at his slightly mature facial features and had mixed feelings. "Little guy, you've changed a lot. I almost couldn't recognize you." Under everyone's shocked gazes, he patted the young man's shoulder heavily with a gratified expression. "Not bad." The young man in black before him was Xiao He. He was the hatched product of the snake egg he had obtained from the divine dragon pool in Miaojiang on Earth. After the spiritual energy recovery on Earth, he let it enter the sky-roaming Dragon King's dragon transformation pool to absorb the WYRM's secret treasure. It then transformed from a snake into a WYRM. Yi Chen named it Yi Demon. However, when they arrived at the ancient desolate realm, they encountered a spatial storm, causing Xiao He to be separated. Who would have thought that they would meet again here? The black-clothed youth's eyes were slightly moist, and his lips trembled as he said, "Master, Little Black has been searching for you with great difficulty." It was precisely his actions that shocked the others to the point they couldn't close their mouths, and it even caused the steel torrent to be stunned. The legend in their eyes, the Dark Dragon King, who was as indifferent as a giant beast of war, was actually the servant of a youth. Wu Gaomin's thoughts were in a mess. Great Qin's Black Dragon Guard was Yi Chen's servant, so what was Yi Chen's relationship with Great Qin? "All right, don't disturb the others," Yi Chen said in between tears and laughter as he extended his arm to help her up. Xiao He stood up and nodded heavily. He turned around and resumed his previous cold temperament. "Black Dragon Guards, listen up. Escort my master into the embassy. Kill anyone who tries to stop us." Here, an earth-shattering sound suddenly exploded in the void. Then, thousands of black-armored figures separated from the group and walked at the very front with surging, killing intent. The entire capital of the Daluo dynasty was instantly cleaned up. Following that, countless citizens of the capital saw a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. An army of iron-blooded ferocious beasts escorted a young man into the capital, and no one dared to stop them. Wu Gaomin did not dare to follow. He could only rush to Marshal St. Mountain and the palace. Clearly, he wanted to report this earth-shattering news. In the embassy, Yi Chen and Xiao He sat opposite each other in a heavily guarded room. Master, when I was swept into the void and severely injured when I woke up, the first thing I thought of was to look for you guys. Xiaohei spoke slowly and told him about his experience after he separated from Yi Qin. However, because I was injured at that time, I couldn't move around much. Later on, I accidentally fell into the demon region. Demon region? Yi Qin was secretly surprised, as if sensing his confusion. Xiaohei explained, "There are people in the ancient, desolate realm. There are sea beasts and wild beasts. The demon region is where the wild beasts gather. It's located in the southern part of Zhongzhou." Yi Qin came to a realization and looked at him in surprise. "How did you obtain such a cultivation base later on?" He could already feel that Xiaohei's cultivation base had skyrocketed, rising from golden core to mid-nascent soul. His strength was comparable to an ordinary martial saint. If he revealed his true form, even a 5-revolution martial saint would not be his match. At that time, because the demon lord's tomb fell into internal strife, I was chased and had no choice but to escape into the demon lord's tomb. I didn't expect to absorb the demon lord's blood essence by chance, causing my strength to skyrocket. He seemed to be sneering. The current demon emperor of the demon region covets the demon lord's blood essence in my body, but it's not convenient for him to forcefully attack me. He could only confer me the Black Dragon King and secretly set up the demon clan's secret descent in my body. Demon clan's secret descent. Yi Qin squinted as a cold gleam flashed through his eyes. Subsequently, he extended his hand and pointed between Xiaohei's brows. He suddenly realized that there was a palm-sized loach in his body eating his blood essence. What a demon emperor! Yi Qin sneered. His actions are equivalent to treating you as a long-term meal ticket. He wants to consume you completely over the years. At this point, killing intent surged in his eyes. Fortunately, you met me in advance. Otherwise, he would have succeeded. How did you become the envoy of the great Qin dynasty? Yi Qin asked again. I formed the Black Dragon Guards back then. My goal was to use their power to find Master. I'm meeting on the way. Xiaohei recalled. Ing followed me back to the demon region. I don't know what method he used, but he actually persuaded the demon emperor to form an alliance with him. Then, Ing led the forces of the southern region into the central state and started the 100 Empire War. At that time, I didn't want to interfere, but I heard that Master appeared in the Tianfeng Sea area and was severely injured by an emperor's throne powerhouse. He stared at Yi Qin with his scarlet eyes, and his lips were filled with coldness. At that time, I wanted to avenge Master. Coincidentally, Ing declared war on the great Yin imperial dynasty, so I led the Black Dragon Guards to take revenge on the great Yin imperial dynasty. Thank you. Yi Qin was moved. He reached out and patted his shoulder lightly. He said in a gratified manner, I'm very pleased with your growth. However, the great Yin Emperor Lord alone can't kill me. I'll settle the score with him in the future. By the way, Master. Xiaohei nodded. Then he seemed to have thought of something and suddenly said, I know where the Patriarch and Yi Wushuang are. P.S. Chapter 3 has been updated today. It's Valentine's Day. Spend it at home. Don't go out. End of this chapter. Chapter 1174. Yi Qin was stunned. Then he narrowed his eyes. Do you know where the Patriarch and Wushuang are? Now that Xiaohei had been found, apart from his daughter, Su Yuhan and his parents, he was most worried about the Patriarch and Wushuang. He was not too worried about the Patriarch. After all, the Patriarch was a tribulation stage almighty in the cultivation world in his previous life. The person who could kill him had probably not been born yet. Instead, he was most worried about Wushuang. Wushuang was a human sword spirit. Although he was human, he was not as good as ordinary people and could easily be at a disadvantage. Among the overlords of the eastern wilderness, there's a special force called a Huang Kingdom. There are only women in this country and not a single man. Xiaohei nodded slowly and said, Even the Empress of a Huang Kingdom is an extraordinary woman. It said that the way they reproduce is to land on an island and recruit men from all over the world to have sex with them on the island. Moreover, the descendants they give birth to are all women. Yi Chen was stunned at first. Then shock appeared in his eyes. Don't tell me that the patriarch is in this Ahuang kingdom. That's right. Xiao He grinned and said in amusement, I don't know what method the patriarch used to subdue the empress of Ahuang kingdom, but the latter listened to him and was loyal to him. Yi Chen did not know whether to laugh or cry when he heard that. However, he could accept it after thinking about the patriarch's lustful nature. He could only say that the patriarch was indeed the patriarch. Master, after the news of you being injured spread, the patriarch secretly came to the Tianfeng Sea area from the eastern wilderness and killed all the sons of the great Li Emperor. Shang Wudao, Xiao He continued. The patriarch even took all of Shang Wudao's concubines. Shang Wudao couldn't defeat him, so he could only ask for reinforcements from the great Yin dynasty. That was why the patriarch escaped back to a Huang kingdom. The corner of Yi Chen's lips twitched slightly. He had to admit that the patriarch was really ruthless. Not only did he kill all his sons, he even made her a cuckold. Anyone would go crazy. He could not help but ask, what about Wu Shuang? Yi Wushuang's situation is a little more complicated. Xiao He's expression froze as he said, I heard that he joined the Sword Hut. After the news of your injury spread, he crossed the middle state to the Tianfeng Sea area and killed Shang Wudao until he fled. Sword Hut? Yi Chen frowned. It was the first time he had heard of this name. Xiao He shook his head slightly and said, The Sword Hut is a hidden power. It is said that there are only two people in the Sword Hut. One is the master and the other is the disciple. Other than that, there is no third person. Most importantly, the Sword Hut is a taboo in Zhongzhou. Rumor has it that the successors of the Sword Hut once caused a bloodbath in Zhongzhou. They single-handedly suppressed many large sects and were seen as heretics in the ancient barren world. Speaking of this, his gaze flickered. Thus, every time a successor of the Sword Hut is born, he will become the target of public criticism and be suppressed by the central province. The smile on Yi Chen's face faded slowly. His eyes looked grim. Who's Wu Shuang's master? I'm not sure. Little Black shook his head. No one has seen his teacher. They only know that he is the master of the Sword Hut. In reality, outsiders don't even know where the Sword Hut is. The master of the Sword Hut. Yi Chen secretly frowned as his eyes flickered nonstop. If he could not find the Sword Hut, how was he going to find Wu Shuang? By the way, master, Little Black said, when Wu Shuang came to the Tianfeng Sea area to hunt down the Emperor of Great Li, he lured the Emperor of Great Yin out. The Emperor of Great Yin tried to kill Wu Shuang, but at that time there seemed to be an Emperor's throne powerhouse standing behind Wu Shuang. The other party intercepted the Emperor of Great Yin. As soon as that was said, even Yi Chen's expression changed. An Emperor's throne powerhouse? Could it be the master of the Sword Hut? Even though he had never fought with an Emperor's throne powerhouse before, he could still feel from his first battle with the Emperor of Great Yin, Emperor Xianku. An Emperor's throne powerhouse was probably equivalent to the soul formation stage in the cultivation world. It should be the master of the Sword Hut. Little Black nodded. However, Wu Shuang and that Emperor's throne powerhouse disappeared. I tried all kinds of methods, but I couldn't find any information. Yi Chen smiled helplessly. Even though there was an Emperor's throne powerhouse standing behind Wu Shuang, he was still worried. After all, Little Black had said that the Sword Hut was regarded as heretics by the central province. One Emperor's throne powerhouse might not be enough. Little Black seemed to have thought of something, and suddenly said, Master, where's Little Mistress? Yi Chen's eyes dimmed. Then he told him everything about how he had been separated from his daughter. Little Mistress is missing? Little Black's expression changed, and the viciousness that had been hidden from the depths of his eyes appeared again. I always thought that Master and Little Mistress were inseparable. I didn't expect this to happen. Before the incident, I handed her over to Mu Kaiwei. Therefore, my initial plan was to come to the Daluo dynasty to meet you, the Great Qin's envoy. Yi Qin shook his head and said, I didn't expect the Great Qin's envoy to be you. Now, many of my doubts have been resolved. I plan to return to the Tianfeng Sea area next. I hope there will be some gains. In reality, he was burning with anxiety. In such an uneasy environment, Mu Kaiwei did not have the ability to protect the little girl. Little Black grinned. His ferocious face was like a bloodthirsty beast. All right, I'll follow Master to the Tianfeng Sea area this time. It's time to settle the score with the Emperor of Great Li. Not long after, an extremely respectful voice came from outside. Master, the Emperor of Great Luo has been waiting outside for a long time. Master, you can meet the Emperor of Great Luo. If we want to return to the Tianfeng Sea area, we'll need to use the wormhole of the Great Luo. There's no need to go through so much trouble. He clenched his fists and said calmly, It's a piece of cake for me to tear through space and arrive at the Tianfeng Sea area now. However, if you want to bring the Black Dragon Guards with you, you should go through the wormhole. Outside the embassy, the current Emperor of Great Luo was dressed in plain clothes as he stood respectfully outside the door. Behind him stood many figures, and more than 10 of them faintly exuded a transcendent aura. Creak, the embassy door opened. Yi Qin and Little Black stepped out. Almost at that moment, the Emperor of Great Li was shocked. He hurriedly bowed. I'm the Emperor of Great Luo, Pei Qinglan. Greetings, Imperial Lord, Great Qin's envoy, Black Dragon King. Greetings, Imperial Lord, Great Qin's envoy, Black Dragon King. The people behind him knelt on the ground in unison. Without exception, their eyes were filled with respect. Little Black was used to the scene. He said coldly, Your Majesty, this is my master, Yi Qin. The Emperor of Great Li bowed even lower. Greetings, Imperial Lord Yi. Chapter 1175. An hour later in the Daluo Palace, Yi Qin and Xiao He sat at the head of the table. All sorts of delicacies were placed in front of them, and there were dancers dancing gracefully. The Daluo Emperor, Pei Qinglan, sat on the dragon throne and led a group of ministers to toast Yi Qin. Although Yi Qin was not interested, he still responded with a smile on account of the former's enthusiasm. As if sensing his thoughts, Xiao He put down his wine glass and said calmly, Your Majesty, the 2 of us have come today to ask for a favor. The Daluo Emperor instantly understood and clapped his hands. The dancers in front of everyone immediately retreated. The former then looked at Yi Qin with respect. I wonder what emperor Yi needs this humble king for. Yi Qin smiled lightly. I'd like to borrow your Majesty's wormhole to go to the Tianfeng Sea area. Is that possible? The Daluo Emperor was slightly stunned. Clearly, he did not expect Yi Qin's request to be so simple. He then frowned and said, Of course. However, Emperor, you might not know that the situation in the Tianfeng Sea area is a little complicated. Is there anything you need us for? The flattery in his words was self-evident. Putting aside the fact that Yi Qin had helped him greatly before, Yi Qin was a genuine emperor's throne stage powerhouse. No dynasty would be willing to give up the opportunity to befriend an emperor's throne powerhouse. Yi Qin was about to decline when he heard Xiao He say, If your Majesty really wants to, why don't you lend us a few people? Yi Qin could not help but look at him. Xiao He said softly, Master, since the emperor is willing to help, we might as well borrow a few fighters from him. It can be considered as helping us solve some trivial matters. May I know who you want to borrow? The Daluo Emperor said in a daze. A cunning look flashed through Xiao He's eyes. I'll lend you half of the Daluo Marshal Saint Mountain's power. The so-called Marshal Saint Mountain was the residence that the Daluo dynasty had specially built for all the martial saints in the Daluo realm. It was also known as the Daluo First Mountain. On the Marshal Saint Mountain, there were a total of more than 30 martial saints, and half was more than 10. The emperor revealed a troubled expression, and he seemed to be slightly hesitant. However, he gritted his teeth and said, "All right, so long as I'm able to help Emperor, then I'll naturally do my best to assist you." As soon as he finished speaking, his gaze swept out and descended onto the violet-clothed old man, Wu Gaomin, and he said, "Senior Wu, you count the number of people and make a trip with Emperor Lord Yi." "Here." Wu Gaomin stood up and replied. This was a vast grassland, and the atmosphere was very tranquil. A few lone wolves could be vaguely seen drinking in the exposed shallows with their heads lowered. Buzz, however, this tranquility was broken in the next moment. Lone Wolf, who had been drinking water with his head lowered, instantly fled in all directions, as if he had encountered something terrifying. The azure void began to distort. When the distortion reached its limit, it was as if a pair of invisible hands had torn a hole in the void. With the appearance of a huge gap, a monstrous killing intent immediately swept out from the gap. A skinny figure slowly walked out of the crack in the void. When his gaze landed on the scene beneath his feet, there were too many emotions in his eyes. Tianfeng Sea area, I'm back again. Behind him, many figures walked out with Xiao He in the lead. Behind them was an army that seemed to be made of killing intent. The killing intent was so dense that it was like a brush that was splashing ink in the air. "Master, is this the Tianfeng Sea area?" Xiao He, who was dressed in black armor, raised his eyes and sized up the world. Wu Gaomin sighed. "I've been to the Tianfeng Sea area once, but it's been a long time. My memories have long since faded." There were 17 figures standing behind him, and the aura they emitted caused the space to tremble slightly. They were the 17 martial saints of the Daluo dynasty. With such power, even if Yi Chen did not attack, it was enough to sweep through the entire Tianfeng Sea area. Xiao He looked at Yi Chen in confusion. "Master, where are we going next?" "Naturally, we'll go to the King Mu Fort first." Yi Chen took a step forward and headed southeast according to his memory. Xiao He and the rest hurriedly followed. The group flew thousands of kilometers along the way, and all they saw were scenes of devastation or people fighting. Clearly, the Tianfeng Sea area had experienced a huge upheaval during Yi Chen's disappearance for a month. "Someone's coming this way." Yi Chen suddenly looked ahead and stopped moving. He spread out his divine consciousness. He could sense that there was a group of people rushing over in a panic 5 kilometers away, and there was a large group of people chasing after them. There was even a voice that Yi Chen was familiar with. It was an old man in linen clothes with an extremely hunched back. It was the Nine-Yang sword leader who had gone missing. "People of the Kunwu Holy Land, you won't be able to escape. If you know what's good for you, land obediently and be bound. Perhaps I, the Emperor of Greatly, will spare your lives." There were 2 martial saints in front of the pursuers. One of them was dressed in black and had an extremely sinister expression. The Kunwu Holy Land would rather die than surrender. There was blood at the corner of the Nine-Yang sword leader's mouth. Even though he was in a sorry state, he still held a long sword in his hand and retreated while fighting. "You're courting death." The black-clothed old man's gaze turned cold. Then he joined forces with a martial saint beside him and charged over. "Old Nanyang will send you to meet the palace master of Taiching Palace right now." Rumble. Under the combined forces of the 2 Second Revolution martial saints, the Nine-Yang sword leader, who was already injured, was even more injured. His right arm was sent flying and blood splattered into the sky. "Sword leader." When the Kunwu Holy Land disciples behind saw this, their eyes could not help but crack open in grief. The Nine-Yang sword leader's aura surged as he chose to burn his life force. "Go! Go quickly! Preserve the last bloodline of the Kunwu Holy Land." At this moment, a faint voice suddenly came from the void. "Nine-Yang sword leader, how have you been?" At the next moment, a skinny young man with long hair slowly appeared in the air. The young man looked at him calmly. It's you." The Nine-Yang sword leader was stunned at first. When he saw Yi Chen's face, clearly, disbelief filled his eyes. Sir, the two martial saints' expressions changed slightly. They looked at Yi Qin as if they were afraid. This is a matter of the great Li dynasty. I hope you don't. They stopped abruptly before they could finish speaking. They saw more than 10 figures attacking Yi Qin from behind. The aura that each of the figures exuded was stronger than theirs. At that moment, intense shock surged in the eyes of the two black-robed old men, and their bodies trembled uncontrollably. Nearly 20 martial saints. Where did this come from? They were not the only ones. Even the 9 sword leader and the rest were stunned. Yi Qin took a good look at the two black-robed old men and the people in great Li attire behind them. His gaze turned cold. People of the great Li dynasty? End of chapter. Chapter 1176. Hearing his unexpected words, Yi Ziqin was stunned. A black-robed old man immediately took a deep breath in and cupped his fists. I'm Zhehua. May I know who you are? You don't even know me. Yi Qin interrupted him and said with a forced smile, Didn't Shang Wudao tell you guys that if it weren't for the Emperor's throne powerhouse, he would have died in my hands long ago? Zhehua was stunned at first when he heard that. Then he widened his eyes and looked at Yi Qin carefully. His expression changed suddenly. It's you, it's you! He was not the only one. Even the expression of the black-robed old man beside him changed drastically. Extreme shock surged in his eyes. It was him. Didn't he die from an emperor's throne powerhouse's attack? It could be said that the battle between Yi Qin and the 6 martial saints a month ago had spread throughout the Tianfeng Sea area. Now that Yi Qin had come back to life, how could the two of them not be shocked? At that moment, Xiao He brought the Black Dragon Guard army over. He looked at Yi Qin inquiringly, Master. Kill them all. Don't leave a single one alive. Yi Qin said calmly. All right. Xiao He grinned and took a step forward. He suddenly charged at Zhehua and the other man. 2 noisy old dogs, come and accept your death. Oh no, run. Zhehua and the other man's expressions changed. They actually split up in an extremely treacherous manner. Clearly they wanted to escape. They're just 2 useless second transition martial saints. If we let you escape from under our noses, that would be the biggest joke in the world. Wu Gaomin chuckled and joined the battle. He and Xiao He attacked together, and Zhehua and the other man died on the spot. Too weak! Xiao He returned to Yi Qin's side and muttered. When this scene entered the eyes of everyone from the Kunwu holy ground, a tempestuous storm arose in their hearts. The 2 martial saints who had almost beheaded the heads of their Kunwu holy land were dealt with so easily. The 9 sword leader's pupils constricted violently. He could clearly see that both Xiao He and Wu Gaomin were much stronger than him. If he was not mistaken, Xiao He seemed to have called Yi Qin master. He shook his head and did not dare to think further. He took a few steps forward and bowed to Yi Qin solemnly. Thank you for saving me, fellow Yi. It's nothing. Yi Qin shook his head lightly and looked at him in surprise. Fellow Jiang, if I remember correctly, didn't he go missing? Previously, the people from your Kunwu holy land even said that I was the one who caused your disappearance. When the people of the Kunwu holy land heard this, their faces were filled with guilt. Fellow Yi, you might not know this, but after you killed the patriarch of the spirit ruins that day, I was shocked by your mystical ability. I gained something by chance and returned to the sect to enter seclusion. The 9 Suns sword head bitterly smiled and said, I never expected that someone would use your name to invite me out that afternoon. They said that they wanted to discuss how to deal with the spirit ruins paradise. At this point, he could not help but sneer. When I went to attend the appointment, I was ambushed from behind and fainted. When I woke up, I realized that I had been imprisoned. All of this was caused by the great Li dynasty colluding with the people of the Central Plains. Then it must be the same for the Grand Purity Palace Master. Yi Qin nodded lightly. What the 9 sword head said was not much different from what he had guessed. Fellow Taiqing has already fallen. The eyes of the sword head of Jiang were filled with hatred. Taiching and I tried our best to escape, but we were hunted down by the Dali dynasty. Unfortunately, Taiching was not as lucky as I was to have been saved by Yi Futian. What are your plans for the future? Yi Chen asked. The nine-yang sword head sighed softly. What other plans can I have? I just want to preserve a trace of the Kunwu Holy Land's bloodline. But the Great Li dynasty refuses to let it go. At this point, he could not help but bow deeply to Yi Chen. If fellow Yi doesn't mind, I'm willing to follow you. He knew very well that no matter how strong Yi Chen was, the dozen or so martial saints behind him were already a terrifying force. There would definitely be a way out if he followed him. If you choose to follow me, you'll definitely face the Great Li dynasty. Aren't you afraid? Yi Chen smiled faintly. Of course, I believe fellow Yi. Moreover, I can't wait to tear Shang Wudao into pieces. The nine-yang sword head snorted coldly. Then he seemed to have thought of something. By the way, fellow Yi, I'm afraid you've come to settle the score with Shang Wudao this time, right? That's right. Why? Yi Chen said. The nine-yang sword head took a deep breath in and said, However, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed because Shang Wudao isn't in the Tianfeng Sea area. To be precise, other than the two people you killed earlier, there's not a single martial saint in the Tianfeng Sea area. What? Shang Wudao isn't in the Tianfeng Sea area? Xiao Hei's gaze turned cold. Could it be that this guy received the news in advance and knew that we were coming, so he ran away? The nine-yang sword head shook his head and said no. In fact, just 3 days ago, the Great Li dynasty sent all their forces to conquer the eastern wilderness. Conquer the eastern wilderness? Why? Yi Chen thought of something and asked immediately. Fellow Yi, you might not know. The nine-yang sword head explained patiently. In this month, the people of the eastern wilderness Ahuang Kingdom came to the Tianfeng Sea area and killed all of Shang Wudao's descendants. They also took Shang Wudao's women. After Shang Wudao completely pacified the Tianfeng Sea area, he joined forces with the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty's prince and sent all his forces to the eastern wilderness to suppress the Ahuang Kingdom. Yi Chen and Xiao Hei could not help but look at each other subconsciously when they heard that. They were still talking about how the Patriarch of Hell was in the Ahuang Kingdom. It was also the Patriarch of Hell who killed Shang Wudao's son and cuckolded him. Who would have thought that Shang Wudao would run off to take revenge? Thinking to this point, Yi Chen said, How powerful are they? The nine-yang sword head took a deep look at Wu Gaomin and the rest and said, With the Great Li dynasty's original strength, it naturally can't compare to them. However, after the people brought by the emperor of the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty in Central State, he paused for a moment, and a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. It said that the emperor of the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty is already a 9-revolution martial saint. Moreover, he has an emperor weapon bestowed by the emperor of the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty. As his voice fell, the expressions of Wu Gaomin and the rest changed. The expressions of Wu Gaomin and the others also changed. Wu Gaomin sucked in a breath of cold air and said, Emperor Yi, the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty has a total of 9 princes, and whether it is in terms of talent or battle prowess, they are all unparalleled. He gulped and said, If we add the emperor weapon bestowed by the emperor of the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty, no one below the emperor's throne stage is a match for him. Xiao Hei could not help but look at Yi Chen when he heard that. Master, if that's really the case, I'm afraid it won't be easy to deal with the Patriarch's strength. On the other hand, the nine-yang sword head looked at Yi Chen dumbfoundedly. His mind was buzzing. Emperor Yi, the emperor, other than the emperor's throne powerhouses. Who else could be called the emperor? P.S. Chapter 3 has been updated for today. End of this chapter. Chapter 1177. The Eastern Barren Territory was known as one of the 5 major regions of the ancient barren world. It wasn't like the Tianfeng Sea region or the northern region, where dynasties and sects were everywhere. There were 3 transcendent forces that guarded this world for generations. They were the mysterious ancient Shi family, the Saint Demon sect, and the Ahuang Kingdom. These three forces divided the eastern Barren territory. The ancient Sher family rarely interacted with outsiders. The people of the Saint Demon sect cultivated demonic arts and acted lawlessly. As for the latter, the Ahuang Kingdom was different from the other three forces. From the common people to the Empress, the Ahuang Kingdom was a country made up of women. They abided by the teachings of their ancestors and didn't allow men to enter the country. The Ahuang Kingdom was built by the sea. Rumor had it that there was a mysterious island in the sea. Every year on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, the Ahuang Kingdom would send the women to the island and then invite the men in the eastern Barren territory to enter the island to mate with them. Of course, this didn't mean that any man could enter the island. They had to be talented and handsome. Rumor had it that if a man and a woman liked each other on the island, they could find a quiet place to do it. Afterward, the man would leave of his own accord, treating it as a transaction and not to be entangled. When the women returned to the country, they would become pregnant. After giving birth, the babies would all be women. There were no exceptions. The women of the Ahuang Kingdom would only choose one man in their lifetime and only do it once. Since the men were all talented and handsome, the women of the Ahuang Kingdom had inherited their genes. It could be said that all of them were as beautiful as flowers and were graceful and graceful. Every year on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, even disciples of the mysterious ancient Sher family and the Saint Demon sect wouldn't let go of this opportunity. It could be said that many of the people of the Ahuang Kingdom were descendants of the Sher family and the Saint Demon sect. That was also why the Sher family and the Saint Devil sect would not deliberately target the Ahuang Kingdom. The three parties maintained a relationship that was as close as fish and water. However, this balance was broken 3 days ago, causing the Ahuang Kingdom to fall into internal and external troubles. The flames of war filled the Ahuang Kingdom. It was no longer the country of women that outsiders envied. The huge light screen of the formation was like an upside-down bowl, covering the entire capital of the Ahuang Kingdom. Countless valiant women stood on the city walls with swords in their hands, nervously looking out of the city walls. Over there, banners fluttered in the wind and surged with killing intent. Everywhere that met the eye was a dense mass of figures that covered the heavens and the earth, and a largely character was inscribed on every single banner. Dozens of figures with powerful auras stood on top of these figures. Although there were only dozens of them, the auras they emitted seemed to be even more intimidating than the army below. 3 days ago, the Emperor of Dali used all the power of the Dali dynasty in the name of revenge and crossed the border to attack Ahuang Kingdom from the Tianfeng Sea area. After 3 days of fierce attacks, the Ahuang Kingdom suffered successive defeats. They had already retreated to the capital. It could be said that the capital was the last barrier. If they lost again, the Ahuang Kingdom would not be far from destruction. Countless female soldiers of Ahuang Kingdom were guarding the city, stared at the people in the distance with hatred. They would never forget that these people had killed their way into their country, destroyed their homes, and humiliated their compatriots. The entire capital of the Ahuang Kingdom was immersed in the dark clouds of war. It seemed that any random move would set off a new round of bloodshed. In a hall deep in the capital, the atmosphere was as intense as a volcanic eruption. The female soldiers in red robes, who were responsible for guarding the palace and protecting the Empress, stood with swords in their hands. They stared nervously at the female soldiers in white in front of them. The battle seemed to be on the verge of breaking out. At the top of the hall on the dragon throne sat a woman with a fairy-like face, wearing a brocade robe embroidered with a fiery red coiled dragon. The woman's hair flowed down like a dark spring, and as her hair danced in the wind, it stirred up layers of black flowing light. She looked coldly at the figures below, like the golden coiled dragon on the brocade robe. It was as if it wanted to soar into the sky, and no one dared to look at it directly. "Imperial advisor, how dare you betray me?" If one looked closely, they would find that her face was slightly pale, and there was a faint black aura between her eyebrows. And she was the empress of the Ahuang kingdom, Jiang Lei. Betray. The person who responded to her was a woman in white clothes. She was no more than 16 years old, and she was as spotless as a fairy. Your Majesty, no, Jiang Lei, you betrayed my Ahuang kingdom first. Tell me clearly today, when did I betray the Ahuang kingdom? Jiang Lei raised her eyebrows with her hands behind her back. Her beauty made all the beauties pale in comparison. You're still being stubborn. The woman in white seemed to laugh mockingly and said, Fine. Today, in front of all the elders in the clan, I'll completely show you how licentious you are. Behind her stood several silver-haired old women. The old women were expressionless, and they faintly emitted a terrifying aura. They were the powerful elders of the Ahuang kingdom. They were formed after the previous empresses had retired. With a word, they could decide the identity of the heir of the Ahuang kingdom and change the world. The woman in white turned around and bowed to the silver-haired old women behind her. She said with a smile, Elders, may I ask if there's a rule in the Ahuang kingdom's ancestral teachings that prohibits men from entering the Ahuang kingdom? As soon as she said that, the expression of Jiang Lei, who was originally dignified on the dragon throne, changed slightly. A trace of panic flashed in her beautiful eyes. That's right. The silver-haired old woman in the middle, who was leaning on a walking stick, said slowly, The Ahuang kingdom does have such an ancestral teaching. Those who violate it will have their cultivation crippled and drowned in a pig cage. Wan Yinru, now that the Ahuang kingdom is facing a national crisis, why did you suddenly call us here? Another elder said with a look of displeasure, Elder, please calm down. The imperial tutor Wan Yinru smiled proudly. Then he said with a faint smile, Because what I'm going to say next involves the ancestral teachings. The next moment, he suddenly turned around and pointed at Jiang Lei on the dragon throne. He shouted sternly, Our most respected empress, it's fine that you disobeyed the ancestral teachings and had an affair with a man. You even hit a man in the palace. As soon as he said that, everyone fell silent. Whether it was the silver-haired old women who were in high positions of power or the hundreds of female soldiers who were fighting each other, their expressions changed. At that moment, Jiang Lei's face became even paler. Her beautiful eyes revealed panic and despair. Pa, how dare you? With a loud sound, a silver-haired old man took a step forward and slapped Wan Yinru's face heavily. He said coldly, How dare you slander Her Majesty? Wan Yinru, do you have any sense of seniority in your eyes? Do you have the etiquette of a ruler and a subject? The slap landed. Even though Wan Yinru was a 5-revolution martial saint, she was still caught off guard and suffered a heavy slap. A trace of scarlet blood immediately flowed from the corner of her mouth. No, Wan Yinru ignored the pain on her face and suddenly roared hoarsely, No, I didn't slander her. I have witnesses. Chapter 1178. Witness. An elder stood up and said expressionlessly, What witness? Wan Yinru turned around and said, Bring her in. Not long after, under everyone's gaze, 2 female soldiers escorted a young girl dressed in a palace maid's robe into the hall. The moment Jiang Lei saw the young lady, she closed her eyes with a slight heartache. That was her personal palace maid, Qiao Er. She was usually in charge of grooming her and was almost inseparable. As if sensing the change in Jiang Lei's expression, Wan Yinru's face regained its smug expression. Elders, you all know Qiao Er, right? The elders nodded slightly. After all, they were the ones who had chosen Qiao or to enter the palace when she was young. Wan Yinru looked like she was watching a good show and said, Qiao Er, tell us everything you know. Qiao Er subconsciously raised her head to look at Jiang Lei. She bit her lips and said guiltily, Your Majesty, I'm sorry. What's there to be sorry about? An elder shouted sternly, Be *th if you lie in front of all the elders today, I'll push you into the basin." The so-called basin was a form of torture used by a Huang kingdom to punish people who had committed the most heinous crimes. They would push people into a pit full of venomous snakes and be bitten to death or poisoned to death by countless venomous snakes. Chow Er's face turned pale when she heard that. She immediately stammered, I can testify that Her Majesty really hit a man in the palace." Her words caused the expressions of the clan elders to change. They could not help but subconsciously glance at Zhang Lei. "Elders, I used to be the one to protect Her Majesty. Even when Her Majesty was sleeping, I would stay in the palace." Chow Er's lips trembled as she said, "However, Her Majesty removed all the palace maids from the palace. Since then, she has never allowed us to go near the palace." "Bastard, what does that mean?" Some elders were furious. Wan Yinru was expressionless. "Continue." Chow lowered her head and clasped her fingers tightly. "Later, when I was grooming Her Majesty, I found a lipstick on her neck." At this point, she gritted her teeth. "At that time, I thought that His Majesty was keeping a female pet in the palace. So I secretly sneaked into the palace. I didn't expect to hear. What did you hear? Hurry up and speak." A clan elder shouted. Chow looked at her feet and shivered. "Then I heard Her Majesty talking to a man." As her voice fell, the entire hall was deathly silent. Everyone stared at Zhang Lei in disbelief. Their eyes were filled with shock. Since ancient times, a Huang kingdom had never allowed men to enter. But now, the Empress in their hearts had even raised a man in the palace? Even the elders on Zhang Lei's side couldn't help but change their expressions. One of them took a deep breath and stared at Zhang Lei. "Your Majesty, is this true?" Under everyone's gaze, Zhang Lei clasped her hands tightly together on her thighs, but she still said without blushing or panting, "I didn't." She knew that once she admitted it, she would be completely finished. Not only would she lose all her prestige in the kingdom, but she would also be punished by the ancestral teachings. That was not the main point. She knew that once she admitted it, she would implicate Quan. "It seems that this lowly servant is lying." An elder was furious on the spot. He looked at Chow and scolded, "Someone drag this lowly servant out and push her into the basin." As soon as he said that, Chow instantly revealed a horrified expression. She couldn't help but look at Wan Yinru as if asking for help. "State Preceptor, save me, save me, wait." Wan Yinru suddenly stopped her. The many elders looked very unhappy. "Wan Yinru, what else do you have to say?" Meeting their gazes, Wan Yinru was also a little flustered. She couldn't help but blurt out subconsciously, "Elders, if you want to prove whether Her Majesty has raised a man or not, you just need to look at her chastity mark." As soon as she finished speaking, Zhang Lei, who was sitting on the dragon throne, trembled as if all the energy in her body had been sucked out. The so-called chastity mark was a medicine that would be painted on a girl's wrist the moment she was born. This medicine would not disappear throughout the year, but once a girl and a man intercourse, it would immediately disappear without a trace. The elders looked at each other and nodded in unison. One of them looked up at Zhang Lei and said, "Your Majesty, forgive us for our rudeness. However, this matter involves too many people. In order to prove your innocence, we can only offend you." As he spoke, one of the elders walked towards Zhang Lei. Seeing this, the state preceptor, Wan Yinru, looked at Zhang Lei with a gloating gaze. On the dragon throne, Zhang Lei's body was extremely weak. Her eyes were filled with despair. She could only watch as the elders walked towards her. She knew, from the next second, she would be finished. At this moment, an extremely violent force suddenly appeared in the main hall. It then attacked the elder in an extremely domineering manner. The elder's expression immediately changed. Then he unleashed all of his cultivation and slammed his palm against the force. Rumble! The entire main hall immediately rumbled. Puff! The elder took a few steps back. After stabilizing himself, He immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. "Who is it?" At the same time, the other elders unleashed their auras as they looked around vigilantly. They were all above the 3rd Revolution Marshal Saint rank, yet they were unable to withstand a single attack from the other party. How could they not be nervous? At that moment, a calm voice exploded. "Is the Ancestors woman someone you old fellows can touch?" The voice was like a clap of thunder. Soon after, it stirred up an extremely terrifying storm in the main hall, causing the entire hall to shake faintly. At the next moment, a young man in a black robe slowly walked in from outside the hall. Although the young man was handsome, there was a trace of unruly and unrestrained expression between his brows. Coupled with the deliberate tug of his beard, it added quite a bit of mature charm to him. Most importantly, the young man's eyes revealed a hint of dignity that made it impossible for others to look him in the eye. As he appeared, Jiang Lei, who was sitting on the throne, was shocked at first. Then, a hint of gentleness flashed through her beautiful eyes. At that moment, the elders in the main hall were all shocked. With murderous intent on their faces, they said, "Who are you?" "Elders, did you see that?" Wan Yinru pointed at the young man and laughed loudly. "A man. There really are men in our Huang Kingdom's palace. It turns out that I did not slander Jiang Lei." The elders' expressions became extremely gloomy when they heard this. The young man acted as if he did not see anyone present. He walked straight towards Jiang Lei, who was sitting on the throne. "Didn't I tell you not to come out?" Jiang Lei seemed to be rebuking him as she complained. However, she could not hide the smile at the corner of her lips. "P.S. My head hurts a little. I don't know if it's because of the first snow of the year last night. I can only write 2 chapters today. I'll try to write 4 chapters tomorrow." Chapter 1179. Didn't I tell you not to come out? When she said that, Jiang Lei seemed to have forgotten that there were elders present. Instead, she looked at the youth in black in front of her lovingly. "How can I bear to let my little beauty be bullied by others?" The youth in black laughed maniacally. Then, in front of everyone, he reached out and pulled Jiang Lei into his arms. "Bastard! Brat, let go of Her Majesty." Seeing this scene, the few clan elders present were all enraged. Even the countless female guards standing at the side who were arguing with each other also glared at the former. That was the empress of their Huang nation. She was pure and holy. How could she be profaned by a man? "You," feeling the youth's dishonest hand touch her buttocks. Jiang Lei's body went limp, and she almost collapsed to the ground. "Elders, everyone, did you see that?" Wan Yinru sneered. "Our most respected empress is actually flirting with a wild man in public." The elders' expressions were extremely ugly. If they weren't worried that Jiang Lei was in the youth in black's hands, they would have already killed him. At this moment, an old woman slowly walked out from among the elders. The old woman's facial features were somewhat similar to Jiang Lei's. She looked at Jiang Lei with a pained expression and said, "Lei, is the truth really as Wan Yinru said?" Under everyone's gaze, Jiang Lei steadied herself and swept her gaze across everyone. She said with determination, "Mother, you're right. Ah Quan and I are truly in love." After saying that, she looked at the youth in black sweetly. The youth in black was satisfied and proud. As soon as she finished speaking, the expressions of everyone present changed again, and they practically did not dare to believe their ears. Her Majesty was actually having an affair with a man when she knew that there were ancestral teachings. "Bastard, Jiang Lei, you've really disappointed us. Jiang Lei has gone against the ancestral teachings and is no longer qualified to continue being the empress of a Huang nation. I suggest that we take her down on the spot and punish her according to the ancestral teachings." The elders' voices were as loud as thunder. Faced with such a situation, Jiang Lei seemed to be much more relaxed. She accepted everything with a smile. In the end, Jiang Lei's mother stepped forward and looked at the youth in black. "Who are you? Aren't you afraid of my Huang Kingdom's revenge? Old fellas, listen up. The black-robed young man chuckled in disdain. My Dharma name is Patriarch Netherworld. I don't care what you want, but I'm going to take Jiang Lei away today. If you dare to stop me, I'll kill you. After saying that, he grabbed Jiang Lei's hand and swaggered out of the palace. Where do you think you're going? Leave your life behind. Boom! At that moment, Wan Yinru made the first move. Majestic and vigorous Yuan Qi fluctuations instantly erupted, turning into a dazzling chain that sped towards the old ancestor and Jiang Lei. She wanted to deal with Jiang Lei today, so how could she let Jiang Lei leave alive? Scram! Ancestor Nether Spring laughed coldly as he stretched out his hand, and then he suddenly grabbed at the origin energy chains that whistled over towards him. Boom! As his hand grabbed forward, the space around the terrifying Yuan power condensed chains started to tremble. It was as if a pair of invisible hands were squeezing it until cracking sounds rang out. Break, as a muffled sound rang out from the old ancestor's mouth. The space distorted to the extreme. The terrifying Yuan Qi chains were forcefully broken by his hand. How can he be so strong? Wan Yinru's expression suddenly changed when she saw that her attack had been broken. She subconsciously controlled her body to retreat. Bitch, you still want to run. However, at that moment, a huge hand suddenly grabbed her, directly grabbing her, and she couldn't move at all. Dead silence. The scene was dead silent. At that moment, everyone present looked at the old ancestor Nether in shock, their eyes filled with disbelief. Even the clan elders were no exception. As a fifth revolution martial saint, Wan Yinru couldn't resist at all. One must know that Wan Yinru's strength was ranked in the top 10 in the entire Huang country. You, who are you? Wan Yinru felt that her body was about to split apart when she was grabbed in midair. Pa! The old ancestor, Nether Spring, raised his hand and slapped her face. Bitch, you're the one who caused all of this today. His slap went down. Wan Yinru's face was almost deformed. Pa! The old ancestor slapped her again. I never hate women, but I'll beat up every ugly woman like you who likes to be a bitch. Ah! Wan Yinru's teeth fell, and she almost fainted. If Jiang Lei was known as the #1 beauty in the Huang country, then she, Wan Yinru, was the #2 beauty. However, the second beauty was called ugly by the old ancestor Nether Spring. Let go of Wan Yinru and Jiang Lei. Boom! Almost at that instant, the several clan elders present could no longer hold themselves back and attacked in unison. In the next moment, a powerful aura erupted. 6 extremely ferocious energy pillars whizzed out and ruthlessly bombarded the old ancestor, Nether Spring. The old ancestor wants to leave. You want to stop me with just a few old women who are about to crawl into the ground. The old ancestor, Nether Spring, laughed wildly. Then he stepped into the air and looked at the 6 people's attacks. He waved his sleeve, and a majestic spiritual origin surged out, forming an energy shield around him. Bang, bang, the 6 people's attacks landed on the energy shield, but they only made a few soft sounds before they dissipated completely as if they were extinguished by water. Is that all you've got? The old ancestor, Nether Spring's smile was filled with undisguised contempt. It could be said that he was extremely arrogant, and his brows were filled with arrogance. His attitude caused the eyes of many women to shine, and they couldn't help but be moved. When the 6 clan elders saw that the 6 of them couldn't do anything to the other party, even when they joined forces, their faces were filled with disbelief. One must know that the 6 of them were all 5 Revolution Martial Saints. When they joined forces, even a 7 Revolution Martial Saint would die on the spot. However, the young man in front of them had easily dealt with it. Who exactly was this young man? Quan's strength has improved again. Jiang Lei, who was next to the old ancestor, Nether Spring, moved her eyes slightly. It was obvious that she was also shocked by the old ancestor's battle strength. Don't be too complacent. At this moment, an elder's expression turned cold, and he said coldly, "Everyone, set up the 6 convergence formation." In the next moment, the 6 of them immediately took mysterious steps, and their surging spiritual origin energy turned into light pillars that shot out. Then they formed a light formation that enveloped the 6 of them. At that moment, Jiang Lei and Wan Yinru's expressions changed drastically, as if they had recalled some memories sealed in their sea of consciousness. If you like Evil Dad in the City, please collect Evil Dad in the City. Chapter 1180. Rumble, boundless fluctuations of origin energy frantically spread out from the huge light formation that enveloped the 6 clan elders. This was a formation cast by 6 5-revolution martial saints with their full strength. The fluctuations caused everyone present to feel incomparably fearful. Terrifying fluctuations of origin energy whizzed out from the light formation, but they did not dissipate. Instead, they landed on one of the clan elders. The clan elder's aura instantly skyrocketed. 5 revolution martial saint, 6 revolution martial saint, 7 revolution martial saint, 8 revolution martial saint. In an instant, that person's aura directly skyrocketed from 5 revolution martial saint to 8 revolution martial saint, while the auras of the other 5 clan elders became dispirited. At that moment, even the patriarch of Yellow Springs' frivolous gaze changed slightly, as if he felt the pressure. "Ah Quan, be careful. This is the 6 convergence formation of our Huang Kingdom. It's said that it was created by the founding empress. It's cast by 6 people, gathering all the power of the 5 people and transferring it to the 6th person, Jiang Lei, who is being dragged by the patriarch of Yellow Spring," said with a pale face. At that time, the founding empress of our Huang Kingdom was already an emperor's throne expert. The Huang Kingdom was founded 2,000 years ago, and the first empress had already reached the legendary emperor's throne realm. However, no one knew what she experienced that led to her death. This secret was only known to the empress and the clan elders. A formation created by an emperor's throne expert? The patriarch of Yellow Springs' expression turned grave. He had already figured out the system of the ancient desolate world and knew how great the gap between the emperor's throne realm and the martial saint realm was. Torrential energy surged endlessly within the 6th clan elder's body like a churning ocean. A dark and cold expression appeared on her aged face. Her eyes locked onto the patriarch of Yellow Spring. Then she sneered and suddenly formed a hand seal. "Spirit-suppressing seal!" Bang! As her voice faded, frightening Yuan power gushed out like a torrent, rapidly transforming into a glowing seal in the air. Rumble! The huge light seal fell like a meteor, directly shattering the void and suppressing the patriarch of Yellow Spring. An all-out attack from an 8-revolution martial saint. "You finally brought out your trump card." The old ancestor Yellow Spring sneered as he watched the enormous seal of light whistling over, and then he tossed Wan Yinru and Jiang Lei away. "Back off!" he shouted fiercely as he stretched out his hand. A ball of black flames suddenly surged out from his palm, and it seemed like a black flower that had bloomed from hell. As soon as the black flames appeared, the entire palace suddenly cooled down, as if the temperature had dropped by dozens of degrees. "Yellow Spring's fire!" As the old ancestor Yellow Spring shouted, the black flame in his hand turned into a black torrent in the shape of a dragon and collided with the huge light seal. At that moment, Patriarch Yellow Spring's face turned slightly pale. It seemed like he had consumed a lot of his quintessential origin energy to execute that attack. Boom, 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 boom! A deafening bang mixed with a violent wave swept out from the palace at that moment. As the black torrent in the shape of a dragon bombarded the huge light seal, the light seal instantly paused, and then cracks that could be seen with the naked eye appeared. In the end, with a cracking sound, it exploded. The formation that the 6 of them had executed was enough to make an 8-revolution martial saint die on the spot, but it was broken at that moment. Wah! The 6 elders were sent flying, smashing countless golden pillars. Their pale faces were filled with disbelief. 139 Chinese. The old ancestor Yellow Spring took a few steps back, and a trace of blood could not help but flow from the corner of his mouth. His face was so pale that there was not a single trace of blood. Both sides were injured. No one was able to gain an advantage. But in general, the old ancestor Yellow Spring was still more skilled. "Ah Quan, are you all right?" Jiang Lei cried out and immediately walked over to support the old ancestor anxiously. "How could I be all right?" The old ancestor Yellow Spring stabilized his body and swept a disdainful glance at the 6 elders. "Is this all you 6 pieces of trash added together? Since you can't stop me, I'll leave with your empress." After saying that, he grabbed Jiang Lei's hand, turned around, and was about to walk out of the palace. However, in the next moment, the space in front of the 2 of them suddenly distorted. A black palm suddenly reached out from the distorted space and directly pushed the old ancestor, Yellow Spring, back. "Haha, if we let you escape, then wouldn't all of our preparations be for naught?" A faint laughter was heard. "Who are you?" The old ancestor, Yellow Spring's eyes were cold. "Hee, you don't even know the Saint Devil Sect's old demon Hellion? Damn it." In an instant, several figures walked out of the distorted space. The leader was wearing a dragon robe, and the other was dressed in black. As soon as the words were spoken, the expressions of Jiang Lei and the injured elders of a Huang nation changed. "It's you." The old ancestor Yellow Spring's gaze fell on the man in the dragon robe, and he sneered, "Son of a bitch, you're here to take revenge on me so soon?" The man in the dragon robe was the Dali dynasty's emperor Shang Wudao. "You must die today." Shang Wudao stared at him and laughed out of extreme anger. When he thought about how the old ancestor had slaughtered all his children and even his most beloved woman, he wanted to tear the old ancestor Yellow Spring into 1,000 pieces. Faced with his ruthless words, the old ancestor Yellow Spring chuckled indifferently. "I have to say, your woman's figure is really good, bastard." Shang Wudao's eyes were filled with murderous intent. At this moment, an old man in black next to him stood out and smiled faintly. "Fellow Shang, why waste your breath on a person who's about to die?" The old man in black had white sideburns, and his brows were filled with arrogance. Most importantly, the energy wave coming from his body made the elders' expressions change. Jiang Lei looked at the old man in black and said, word by word, "Saint Devil Sect's old demon Hellion." The 3 overlords of Eastern Wilderness were the Sure family, a Huang nation, and Saint Devil Sect. The old man in front of her was the peerless demon of Saint Devil Sect. Old demon he. "You've finally come." Under everyone's gaze, the nation master of a Huang kingdom, Wan Yinru, covered her face and threw herself into the former's arms intimately. Feminine, Jiang Lei, and all the elders were in disbelief. Who would have thought that the imperial preceptor of a Huang nation actually knew old demon Hellion of Saint Devil Sect? And they were so intimate with each other in public. Meeting everyone's gaze, old demon Hellion cackled. "Hee, I guess you must be very curious, right?" Old demon Hellion walked straight to the injured elders and squatted down to look at them. "To tell you the truth, this old man has been preparing for this day for over 200 years. 200 years?" One of the elders tried to stand up, but found that he was powerless. He could only glare at him angrily. "In other words, you were already involved with Wan Yinru 200 years ago. If you like evildoer daddy in the city, please collect. Evildoer Daddy in the City." Chapter 1181. "That's right." Wan Yinru walked over and said proudly, 200 years ago, I went to a Huang island as soon as I became the state preceptor and fell in love with Hellion there. I know you old farts abided by the ancestral teachings and didn't let me bring a man back. I hate you." Her expression was ferocious. "So from that moment on, I made an agreement with Hellion that I would be his spy in a Huang kingdom, be asterisk H, you be asterisk T. Many of the elders were furious. Jiang Lei stared at her and said coldly, Wan Yinru, since you and I both fell in love with a man, why did you poison me and expose Aquan's existence? It's very simple. Wan Yinru smiled coldly. Because I accidentally learned that the first founding empress of a Huang kingdom was an emperor's throne strong. After she died, she left behind a method to reach the emperor's throne, and Hellion needed it. And you are one of the keys to open the secret treasure of the founding empress. At this point, her expression was full of pride. I knew that if I didn't pull you down from the throne and sow discord between you and the elders, it would be very difficult to deal with you. As soon as she finished speaking, the injured elders trembled violently, and regret appeared in their eyes. The founding empress of a Huang kingdom left behind a secret treasure? Jiang Lei's pretty face finally changed a little, and she was in disbelief. She knew that the founding empress of a Huang kingdom was an emperor's throne strong practitioner, but she died later. But she didn't know that the former had left behind a secret treasure before she died. Very surprised, right? Wan Yinru smiled coldly. In fact, I didn't know at first, but Hellion told me later. After I came back, I also secretly investigated and approved Hellion's guess. She couldn't help but look up at the elders. Elders, Wan Yinru was right. The secret treasure is under a Huang island. The so-called Huang island was an island above the sea of a Huang kingdom. Every year, on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, the single women of a Huang kingdom would step onto the island and have sex with the men they liked. As soon as she said this, the expressions of the elders changed. It was obvious that she had hit the nail on the head. They originally kept this matter as the biggest secret in their hearts, planning to pass it on to Jiang Lei in the future. They didn't expect Wan Yinru to know. Traitor! Wan Yinru, you traitor! The clan elders cursed and cursed. They wanted nothing more than to tear Wan Yinru into pieces. If Jiang Lei's affair with the Patriarch of Hell disappointed them, then Wan Yinru's collusion with the Saint Devil sect in an attempt to steal the Huang kingdom's treasures made them extremely resentful. Why are you wasting your breath on these old women? Just kill him. We only want Jiang Lei anyway. Shang Wudao, the emperor of Dali dynasty, snorted coldly. All right, we'll do as fellow Taoist Shang says. Old Devil Hellion laughed cruelly. Then he walked toward the clan elders with a murderous aura. Wait! Right at this moment, Jiang Lei, who had been watching from the side, suddenly stopped them. Then she quickly walked to the front of the clan elders and coldly stared at old Demon Hellion. If you dare to kill them, then you can forget about getting the founding empress's secret treasure. Stupid woman, what are you doing? Without waiting for old Demon Hellion to speak, old Ancestor Yellow Spring's figure flashed over. Obviously, he wanted old Demon Hellion not to intervene. To the old ancestor, the life and death of these clan elders had nothing to do with him. Moreover, the so-called secret treasure that everyone was talking about was not attractive to him. No matter how great the secret treasure was, it was merely left behind by an emperor's throne realm expert. What kind of great expert's tomb had he not seen in his previous life? The clan elders looked at Jiang Lei in disbelief, as if they did not expect that Jiang Lei would still protect them at this moment. Jiang Lei looked at old ancestor Yellow Spring, as if asking for help. Aquan, no matter what, they are still people of my Huang kingdom, and we are related by blood. As soon as she said that, the clan elders felt extremely guilty. It's really touching. Old Demon Hellion smiled faintly and squinted at Jiang Lei. Miss Jiang, don't forget that you can't even protect yourself, and you still want to save them? I only know that you don't dare to kill me. Otherwise, you can forget about getting the founding empress's secret treasure. Jiang Lei stared back at him. Slap. Old ancestor Yellow Spring slapped her, but heavily. Stupid woman, with me here, who can touch you? You. The great Li Emperor, Shang Wudao, smiled disdainfully. I admit that you are stronger than me, but you are at most an 8-revolution martial saint. Fellow Hellion is an 8-revolution martial saint, and there are even a few 7-revolution martial saints. What do you have to fight against us? That's right. The Saint Devil Sex, old demon Hellion sneered. If you were at your peak, this old man might have some difficulty suppressing you. But when you fought with these old women just now, you were already injured. Then let's do it. Patriarch Yellow, Spring, stared coldly at them. His handsome face became a little twisted at this moment. Kill him. Old Devil Hellion shouted and took the lead to attack Old Ancestor Yellow Spring. Monstrous devil chi gushed out of his body. Kill. At the same time, several 7th Revolution martial saints also unleashed their auras and charged forward. Clearly, they wanted to kill Patriarch Yellow Spring on the spot. Back off. Old Ancestor Yellow Spring flicked his sleeve and pushed Jianglei and the others back. Boom! With a sharp whistle, a black long sword shot out from Patriarch Yellow Spring's body. The black long sword was burning with black flames. Netherworld sword. It was the first time the Patriarch had revealed the magic treasure he had refined. Even Yi Chen had never seen it before. It meant that the pressure he was under was extraordinary. Die, Patriarch! In an instant, Patriarch Yellow Spring held the black long sword in his hand and slashed out a shadow-like sword chi at Old Demon Hellion. Old Demon Hellion's expression changed slightly. He seemed to have sensed the might of this sword and chose to dodge quickly. However, a 7th Revolution martial saint behind him was directly slashed in the chest by the sword. As his body split apart, the upper and lower parts were completely enveloped by the black flames, and then there was nothing left. What kind of flame is this? Seeing this scene, everyone's pupils constricted. Heavenly Demon Seal. With a flip of Old Demon Hellion's palm, black light condensed and turned into a huge black mark. Then he slapped out with his palm. Heaven and Earth Level 4, Slaughter Sword. Countless sword shadows suddenly appeared in Patriarch Yellow Spring's hand. The entire palace seemed like it could be sliced into countless pieces at any time. Boom! The huge palm print collided with the sword shadows that filled the sky. Terrifying energy fluctuations spread out, causing the entire palace to shake violently. Tap, tap, tap. Patriarch Yellow Spring retreated repeatedly. I've said it before. You might be able to fight me at your peak. Unfortunately, you're no match for me in your current state. The black seal trembled, and Old Demon Hellion smiled disdainfully. If you like Evil Dad in the City, please collect Evil Dad in the City. Chapter 1182. Is that so? The Old Ancestor Yellow Spring's gaze was cold as he suddenly smiled. I forgot to tell you that my sword isn't that easy to receive. In the next moment, among the sword shadows that were dispersing in the void, a gray aura suddenly condensed silently. Like a small snake, it then shot toward Old Demon Hellion's head. The gray sword aura was too fast, and it was too close. By the time Old Demon Hellion noticed it, it was already too late. Arg! He screamed as his body fell heavily to the ground. His body even began to wither at a speed visible to the naked eye. His miserable screams sounded like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves. Under everyone's gazes, his body directly withered into a pile of rotten flesh. Only his divine soul shot out from his body. This was the Old Ancestor's Slaughter Sword. The gray sword aura was the Slaughter Sword aura. Your divine soul belongs to the Old Ancestor. The Old Ancestor Yellow Spring took a step forward and directly grabbed at his divine soul. Crown Prince, save me! Save me! Old Demon Hellion's divine soul frantically roared. Rumble! Suddenly, a slender hand stretched out from the void and pointed at the Old Ancestor Yellow Spring's back. Get lost! The Old Ancestor Yellow Spring, suddenly turned around and slashed out with his sword. A 3-meter-long sword Aura whistled out, as if he wanted to cut down the huge hand. Bang! Gotcha! However, under the huge hand, his sword was directly broken, and the flying sword in his hand also shattered. Puff! The old ancestor Yellow Spring continuously vomited blood. He had long refined the flying sword, and now that it was damaged, his mind was also injured. In the next moment, under everyone's gazes, a figure slowly walked out from the distorted space. It was a young man wearing an embroidered robe. The moment he appeared, the entire palace seemed to have dimmed. An invisible pressure made most of the people present kneel. The old ancestor Yellow Spring forcefully resisted the pressure. A 9-revolution martial saint. He must be a 9-revolution martial saint. Even he was in such a state, let alone Zhang Lei and the others. All of them vomited blood and uncontrollably prostrated themselves on the ground. The youth in the official robe looked around expressionlessly. When he saw old Demon Hellion, who was only left with his divine soul, he couldn't help but say, "Trash!" Boom! Old Monster Hellion's divine soul was immediately shattered. Everyone was so shocked that they couldn't say a word. He did not expect the other party to be so ruthless. When the young man in the official robe looked at old ancestor Yellow Spring, he could not help but be shocked. "You're able to resist my pressure!" "Greetings, Crown Prince." Daoist Shang Wu prostrated on the ground, trembling in fear. Too strong. One had to know that there was a 7th cycle martial saint among them, but they did not even have the qualifications to stand in front of the other party. Only at this moment did they realize that the Imperial Prince was not someone they could imagine. The Prince of Great Yin, Yin Jucheng, Zhang Lei was in despair. It was rumored that the Great Yin Sovereign Lord had a total of 9 princes. All 9 of them were the most outstanding geniuses in the entire ancient barren world. They had long reached the martial saint realm and were only 1 step away from the Emperor's throne realm. "You're not bad." Yin Jucheng looked at old ancestor Yellow Spring quietly. "If you're willing to submit to me, I can spare your life." "Who do you think you are?" Old ancestor Yellow Spring smirked coldly. "When I was dominating the universe, you were still AF * king, single cell." Although he said that, the pressure in his heart multiplied. He was not the other party's match, even at his peak, let alone now that he was injured. Could it be that the Patriarch had to abandon Zhang Lei and escape alone? At most, the Patriarch would find a place to hide and cultivate until he reached the soul formation stage. Then he would come back and take revenge on that brat. The Patriarch was conflicted. He was confident that he could escape from Yin Jucheng, but he could not bear to part with Zhang Lei. After all, he thought that Zhang Lei had treated him well. That was also the biggest difference between the Patriarch and Yi Qin. The Patriarch was a smart person. He would not force himself if he could not defeat him. As if sensing his conflict, Zhang Lei urged, "Quan, run. Don't worry about me. Just remember to avenge me. Run." Imperial Prince Yin Jucheng's body was bathed in light as he landed gently on the ground. He was like a god looking down on the world. "No one has ever escaped from my hands. No one. Not even a 9-revolution martial saint." He walked toward old ancestor Yellow Spring step by step. "I'm going to refine you into a puppet and make you one of my 10 war puppets. Damn it, if I'm still a demon, how dare a perfected nascent soul junior like you act cool in front of me?" Old ancestor Yellow Spring groaned internally. Shang Wudao gloated as he watched this scene. "I've said it before. You'll definitely die today. Give up resisting." Imperial Prince Yin Jucheng stretched out his hand like the hand of fate. Just as the old ancestor Yellow Spring was about to fight with his life on the line, an explosion suddenly came from the void. "You want to touch me? I won't allow that." The voice seemed to have pierced through the restraints of space and resounded in everyone's ears. "Gotcha!" The hand that Yin Jucheng had stretched out broke with a loud bang under the sound. Tap, tap, tap. The former only felt an unparalleled pressure, causing him to take a few steps back and spit a mouthful of blood. "Who is it?" At this moment, his expression was no longer as calm as before. Instead, it was replaced by deep shock. One had to know that when he descended, he had already sealed off this space. No one below the Emperor's throne could break through it. However, now, thinking to this point, his expression changed abruptly, and his eyes that were looking at the void were filled with shock. When the old ancestor Yellow Spring heard this voice, he was stunned at first. Then he seemed to have thought of something and could not help but exclaim, "Fellow Yi!" "Ha ha! Old ancestor, you're in a sorry state this time." As a hearty laughter sounded, a huge crack suddenly appeared in the space above everyone's heads. In an instant, a young man with long hair and a green robe slowly walked out of the crack and landed on the ground. Who else could it be but Yi Qin? At that moment, the smile on Shang Wudao's face, who was originally extremely smug, froze. Disbelief surged out of his eyes as if he had seen a ghost. The old ancestor Yellow Spring's body shook. He then walked over quickly and hugged Yi Qin tightly. He said, while smiling, "How can you be any better? I heard that you were beaten to death some time ago." "I won't die even if you die." Yi Qin pushed him away. Only then did he realize that there was a faint trace of tears in his eyes. He seemed to be revealing his true feelings. Yin Jucheng pretended to be calm and said, "Fellow!" Yi Qin raised his hand and slapped him. Under everyone's horrified gazes, he directly slapped him to the ground. Yi Qin retracted his hand slowly and looked at him calmly. "Do you think you can call me fellow?" Chapter 1183. Slap. The crisp slap could be heard in the palace. Everyone stared dumbfoundedly at Yin Jucheng, who was slapped to the ground by Yi Qin. That was the prince of the great Yin dynasty. His father was an emperor's throne powerhouse. Putting aside his identity, he was also a 9-revolution martial saint in terms of strength. Whether it was talent or battle prowess, he was one of the best in the ancient desolate realm. This person is too powerful. I'm afraid he's an emperor's throne powerhouse. The few elders of the Huang kingdom who were sitting in the corner looked at each other, and deep shock flashed in their eyes. Even the patriarch of hell was no exception. He had fought Yin Jiucheng before, so he knew very well how powerful the former was. However, he was slapped to the ground by Yi Qin now. He seemed to have thought of something as he thought to this point. Disbelief surged in his eyes as he looked at Yi Qin. "Fellow Yi, why?" Yi Qin nodded lightly when he met his gaze. "TSK." Patriarch Yellow Spring sucked in a cold breath. His heart was extremely shocked. Soul formation stage. "Fellow, Yi had actually stepped into soul formation stage. As a tribulation stage powerhouse in his previous life, he knew very well what kind of existence soul formation stage was. It could be said that countless talented geniuses were stuck at the perfected late stage, nascent soul stage, unable to take a step forward in their entire lives. Even the patriarch of hell had spent hundreds of years to step into soul formation stage. However, how long had he known Yi Qin? It had only been over a year. In just over a year, he had watched Yi Qin advance from spirit assembly to soul formation stage. "Fellow Yi, I'm convinced." The patriarch of hell clasped his fists at Yi Qin. "I'm convinced from the bottom of my heart this time. Greetings, divine Lord Yi." In the cultivation world, foundation-building cultivators were masters, golden core cultivators were true lords, nascent soul cultivators were great cultivators, and soul formation cultivators were divine lords. It was a form of address and status. Perhaps the patriarch had a sense of superiority when facing Yi Qin because he was a tribulation stage powerhouse in his previous life. However, he had no choice but to admit defeat now. While the two of them were talking, Shang Wudao, the Emperor of Greatly, was ashen as he muttered to himself, "How is this possible? How is this possible?" Yi Qin had withstood a blow from an emperor's throne fighter, which was shocking enough. Who would have thought that an existence as powerful as the imperial prince Yin Jucheng was still no match for him? "Senior, At that moment, Imperial Prince Yin Jiucheng stood up as well. He stared at Yi Chen with respect. I wonder if an Emperor's Throne Stage Senior has arrived. If I've offended you in any way, please do it for my father's sake. His heart sank to rock bottom, and it was even to the extent that he was trembling. He'd completely lost the demeanor of an imperial prince, not for any other reason, but because only an emperor's throne realm powerhouse could easily defeat him. It would have been better if Yi Qin had not mentioned Di Xianku. As soon as Di Xianku was mentioned, Yi Chen's gaze turned colder. He slapped him directly as if he was swatting a fly. Kneel! Suddenly, an invisible force came crashing down. Yin Jiucheng felt like he was being pressed down by an invisible hand and fell to his knees. Senior, my father is the Emperor of Great Yin, Emperor Xianren. Yin Jiucheng's face was filled with humiliation. When had he, Yin Jiucheng, ever been treated like this? Yi Chen did not answer at all. His hand continued to press down. Yin Jiucheng immediately felt as if he was carrying a mountain on his back. His head was stuck to the ground. He was crazy and unwilling. In the end, his entire body was stuck to the ground as if he was prostrating on the ground. No matter how he struggled, it was useless. Everyone was trembling with fear as they watched this scene. Was this the terror of an emperor's throne stage powerhouse? Written Chinese. I'll settle the score with you later. Yi Chen retracted his hand slowly. His gaze landed on Shang Wudao, the emperor of Great Li. He said with a faint smile, Shang Wudao, how have you been? Shang Wudao forced a smile and looked at Yi Chen with an extremely complicated expression. I just want to know, have you stepped into the emperor's throne stage now? Is it important? Yi Chen was expressionless. Yes, it's not important anymore. Shang Wudao took a deep breath in, and a wave of lethargy came from his body. As the saying goes, the winner is king and the loser is a bandit. I have nothing to say now that I've fallen into your hands. He was the ruler of a dynasty after all. Naturally, he was not someone who was afraid of death and begged for mercy. Very well, I'll leave your corpse intact. Yi Chen nodded lightly and extended his hand to grab the former. Shang Wudao tried to resist, but he realized that he could not move at all. Blurg! Yi Chen reached out and broke his dantian directly. Why, you're so ruthless! Shang Wudao's face was filled with resentment. Yi Chen actually crippled his cultivation base. Yi Chen scoffed and pressed his palm on his head. He performed the soul-searching tactic forcefully. He wanted to know the whereabouts of Su Yuhan and his parents. Back then, Mu Kaiwei had said that after the ghost ship sailed into the Tianfeng Sea area, the Great Li dynasty had also participated in the operation to encircle the ghost ship. As the ruler of the Great Li dynasty, Shang Wudao definitely knew about it. The former's tragic voice rose and fell in the entire palace. It was as if he had experienced the cruelest punishment in the world, causing everyone to tremble in fear. Seeing this scene, the face of Imperial Prince Yin Jiucheng, who was suppressed on the ground, was filled with fear. Then he seemed to have thought of something and gritted his teeth. Rumble! At the critical moment, he chose to self-destruct. However, it was his body that self-destructed. The remaining soul was wrapped in a ray of green light. It broke through the void and entered the spatial rift. Oh no, fellow Yi, he escaped. The patriarch of hell was shocked. You think you can escape from my grasp? Yi Chen chuckled softly as if he was disdainful. Then he stretched out his hand and spread his fingers. He reached into the spatial rift before it closed. A barely audible scream came from the void, followed by a deafening roar. Yi Chen retracted his hand at the right time. The patriarch of hell asked, How is it? I've destroyed his soul. Yi Chen frowned. He looked at the healing wound on his right index finger and said, he should be carrying a primordial spirit treasure. This primordial spirit treasure actually chose to self-destruct. Among the elders of a Huang kingdom, a silver-haired old woman cried out in surprise. That must be Di Xianbing's emperor weapon. Although he said that, he looked at Yi Chen with more and more fear in his eyes. The self-destruction of the emperor weapon did not cause any serious damage to him. At that moment, Jiang Lei lifted her sleeves and took a few steps forward. She bowed to Yi Chen. I'm Jiang Lei. Greetings, Senior. Thank you for saving our lives, Senior. With that, she was about to kneel. Chapter 1184. Seeing that Yi Chen's expression did not look like he was faking it, Jiang Lei bowed and let it go. You can tell. The Patriarch of Hell looked at him in surprise. Yi Chen shook his head and said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, before I came, I heard that you're enjoying yourself in a country of women. You're having fun with Her Majesty every night. You're so happy that you forget about home. The words having fun every night made Jiang Lei's pretty face burn. I'm no longer the Empress of a Huang kingdom. You know me best, kid. The Patriarch of Hell grinned and said, I didn't cry in vain when I heard that you were beaten to death. Yi Chen smiled warmly. Although he had not known the Patriarch for long, they trusted each other completely. He could not help but take another look at Jiang Lei and nodded to himself. He had to admit that Jiang Lei was extremely beautiful both in appearance and temperament. It was no wonder that the Patriarch liked her. Thinking to this point, he waved his sleeve and several bottles of medicinal pills fell into Jiang Lei and the Patriarch's hands. Take them to recover from your injuries and detoxify. I won't stand on ceremony with you. The Patriarch of Hell chuckled. He sat cross-legged and consumed it after receiving it. He healed his injuries in front of Yi Chen. After the poison in Jiang Lei's body was removed and her cultivation base recovered, the elders looked at each other and knelt before her. Your Majesty, we beg you to continue being the Empress. However, Jiang Lei shook her head and said, Elders, I know that I violated the ancestral teachings. I'm no longer fit to be the Empress. If your Majesty doesn't agree, we'll kill ourselves in front of you. The elders knelt and refused to get up. Their expressions were extremely firm. This time they had really seen through it. If Jiang Lei had not risked her life to protect them earlier, they would have died long ago. Moreover, they could tell that the Patriarch of Hell knew an emperor's throne powerhouse like Yi Chen. If they were to befriend him, it would only benefit a Huang kingdom. Seeing that Jiang Lei still wanted to refuse, the Patriarch of Hell curled his lips and said, Since they're threatening to kill themselves, you can continue being the Empress. Jiang Lei nodded and said, Elders, our top priority now is to repel the enemy forces outside the city. As soon as she finished speaking, a female official rushed in from outside with an incomparably interesting expression on her face. Seeing who it was, Jiang Lei and the other elders' hearts sank. What's wrong? Is the enemy attacking the city? This time, the Dali dynasty has sent out millions of soldiers. With the addition of the disciples of the Saint Devil sect, the total number of soldiers is over 2 million. If they attack the city, the female officer beamed with joy and said, Your Majesty, elders, good news, great news, the enemy has been defeated. Yi Chen could not help but nod in satisfaction after she told him everything that happened. It turned out that Xiao He had brought his black dragon guards and over 10 martial sages of the Daluo dynasty to the eastern wilderness. Seeing that the enemy had surrounded the city, he had surrounded it from the back without saying anything. Together with the army of the Huang kingdom, they had annihilated the enemy. Xiao He's black dragon guards numbered more than 5,000, and they were all demonic beasts that had cultivated successfully. The lowest cultivation base was at the pseudo-emperor stage, so they were the most suitable to deal with a group of ordinary people. Speak of the devil. Xiao He, dressed in black armor, strode into the palace with a murderous aura. The enemy forces outside the city have been defeated. His monstrous, murderous aura caused the expressions of Jiang Lei and the rest to change. Well done. Yi Chen nodded while smiling. Reed, the Patriarch of Hell, looked at him carefully and suddenly said, Your second brother? Xiao He's expression froze, and he was unwilling to talk to him. If Yi Chen was the person he feared the most, then the patriarch was the second most. He would never forget the experience of being tricked by the patriarch to lick the electric socket with his tongue before he could transform. Second brother, it's really second brother. The patriarch of hell walked over and circled around him. In the end, he clicked his tongue in wonder. You've changed too much, kid. I almost didn't recognize you. In less than half a day, the entire Huang kingdom went from despair to excitement with Yi Chen's arrival. Therefore, Yi Chen's reputation in a Huang kingdom soared. At that moment, countless women fell in love with Yi Chen. After this incident, the few elders discussed and decided to abolish the ancestral rule that a Huang kingdom was not allowed to accept men. In other words, from today onwards, the women of a Huang kingdom could communicate with men from the outside world. Once this change was announced, the entire kingdom was shaken. Even the entire eastern wilderness was shaken. As night fell, in the guest room of a Huang kingdom, Yi Chen chased away the dozen or so beautiful women that Jiang Lei had specially arranged for him. He closed the door and sat down to look at Xiao He and the patriarch of hell before him. TSK, fellow Yi, the dozen or so women that Jiang Lei arranged for you are all elites of a Huang kingdom. Moreover, they're all virgins. There are even a few pairs of twins among them. You actually don't like them. The patriarch of hell shook his head and said, It's not that I want to criticize you, but you're too pure and have few desires. We cultivators are already going against the heavens. Why do we have to abandon our emotions and desires? Immortal cultivation. In the patriarch's opinion, it's not a tiresome cultivation. We're just cultivating to do whatever we want. He pointed at Yi Chen. Look at me. I used to have a harem of 3,000, but they didn't mind at all. They even loved me to death. The corner of Yi Chen's lips twitched slightly. He really could not refute his scumbag theory. The patriarch of hell could not help but look at Xiao He. Second brother, don't be like fellow Yi. Tell me, which woman do you like? I'll arrange a few for you. Xiao He looked at him with disdain. There are so many beautiful women in this world. In a Huang kingdom alone, there are tens of millions of single women. Even if you sleep with one every day, you'll sleep for decades. What's the difference between you and a pig? Are you trying to go to heaven? The patriarch of hell was furious. Enough! Yi Chen interrupted their argument and said with a frown, It's time to discuss what we're going to do next. The two of them stopped on the spot. Yi Chen nodded in satisfaction and glanced at the patriarch. What do you plan to do next, patriarch? I don't have any plans. The patriarch of hell said, You know what kind of person I am. I just want to stay in this gentle place. However, I heard that the founding empress of a Huang kingdom was once an emperor's throne powerhouse who was suspected to be on the soul formation stage. She even left behind a secret treasure. He said seriously, What you mean is that I plan to stay for the time being and find this secret treasure. I want to see if there's a chance for you to step into the soul formation stage. Just when Yi Chen was about to speak, he heard him say again, The patriarch is currently only at the intermediate stage, nascent soul stage. Fellow Yi, your enemies are getting stronger and stronger. I won't be able to help you much even if I follow you now. If you like Evil Dad in the City, please collect Evil Dad in the City. Chapter 1185. So, you and second brother should leave first. The patriarch said in one breath, If you know the whereabouts of your wife and parents, just send someone to a Huang kingdom to inform me. I'll accompany you to conquer the entire ancient desolate realm. Yi Chen nodded slightly. In reality, the patriarch was right. The patriarch would not be of much help if he followed him now. It was better to give him some time to increase his cultivation. Thinking to this point, he narrowed his eyes and said, Sure. I also want to tell the two of you something. It's about my daughter, Yuhan, and the rest. You found out about it from Shang Wudao's soul search? The patriarch of hell was not surprised at all. Yi Chen nodded. That's right. Through the soul search. I found out that my daughter and Mook Highway were taken away by an envoy from the Jade Lake, Sacred Land. Jade Lake Sacred Land? The Patriarch of Hell was confused. He was in the eastern wilderness and knew almost nothing about Zhongzhou. On the other hand, Xiao Hei's eyes narrowed as he said, Master, according to what I know, the Jade Lake Sacred Land is located in the northern region of Zhongzhou. It's a supreme sect in the ancient, desolate realm. It's said that they originated from the Queen Mother of the West, and most of their disciples are women. In other words, everyone in the Jade Lake Sacred Land is female? The Patriarch of Hell's eyes lit up. That's right. Xiao Hei nodded and said, Rumor has it that the Jade Lake Sacred Land has an Emperor's Throne powerhouse and countless martial saint elders. Whether it's their background or status, they're not weaker than the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty. An Emperor's Throne powerhouse. The Patriarch of Hell was extremely disappointed. He clicked his tongue in fear. Fellow Yi, if you want to go to the Jade Lake Sacred Land to pick up Ming Ming, you have to be careful. The forces in the ancient desolate realm are very complicated. What about the Radiant Saint Hall? Yi Chen asked again. He learned from Shang Wudao's mind that Mu Kaiwei and Ming Ming had gone to the Jade Lake Sacred Land. As for Jiu, she was taken away by the Radiant Saint Hall's envoy. Xiao Hei shook his head. I'm not sure about that. Yi Chen's eyes flickered nonstop as he said with a sneer, Ming Ming is my daughter. As her father, it's only right for me to take her away. It's fine if they're reasonable, but if they're unreasonable, I don't mind destroying the Jade Lake Holy Land. Xiao Hei's eyes flashed fiercely. Master, what's the situation with Madam and the rest now? This is the second thing I want to say. Yi Chen squinted slightly. I suspect that the Great Yin Dynasty knows where Yu Han and my parents are. After searching Shang Wudao's soul, he learned that after the ghost ship sailed into the Tianfeng Sea area, many forces in the Central Plains sent out experts to besiege the crazy Taoist. Among them, a 9-revolution martial saint and even an Emperor's Throne powerhouse were mobilized. In the end, the crazy Taoist was defeated. Everyone on the ghost ship was captured, including Su Yuhan, his parents, and the little girl, Qian. However, Shang Wudao had no memory of the details of how they were captured. He had never been present at the time, or perhaps he was not qualified to be on the same stage as those big shots. The only thing he knew was that Su Yuhan, Yi Chen's parents, the crazy Taoist, and Qian were taken away by the 3 forces. Among them, Yi Chen's parents seemed to have been taken away by the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty, the crazy Taoist and Qian were taken away by a 2nd force, and Su Yuhan was taken away by a 3rd force alone. However, Shang Wudao had no recollection of the information about the 2nd and 3rd forces. The Great Yin Imperial Dynasty? The Patriarch of Hell's eyes focused, and he said in a deep voice, Fellow Yi, according to what you said, it seems like the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty is the only breakthrough point. Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. Xiao Hei smirked coldly. Master, it was the Great Yin Imperial Emperor, Xian Ku, who ambushed you earlier. Now, they're related to the whereabouts of Master and Madam He. It seems like we're definitely going to fight the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty. Yi Chen said calmly, Therefore, my current idea is to go to the Jade Lake Sacred Land to retrieve my daughter first. Then, I'll settle the old and new grudges with the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty. Whether it's the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty or the Jade Lake Sacred Land, they both have Emperor's Throne powerhouses. The Patriarch of Hell hesitated and said, Fellow Yi, you have to be careful. After all, you're the only one who has stepped into the soul formation stage. It's very likely that you'll be attacked from both sides. If Ying is willing to join forces with Master, it might not be so troublesome. Xiao Hei said, After all, Ying is also an Emperor's Throne powerhouse. Moreover, he has formed an alliance with many great sects and knows other Emperor's Throne powerhouses. At this point, he seemed to have thought of something and added, There's also Wushuang. There's also an Emperor's Throne powerhouse behind him, the Master of the Sword Hut. If we can find Wushuang, there's also an emperor's throne powerhouse behind Yi Wushuang? The Patriarch of Hell was surprised. Xiao He immediately told him everything he knew about Yi Wushuang. The Patriarch of Hell could not help but say, "If it's really as you said, and the sword hut is elusive, then it'll be very difficult to find Yi Wushuang." "Not necessarily." Yi Chen smiled lightly. "Indeed, we don't know where Wushuang is, but we can let him know where we are." Xiao He was stunned at first. Then he came to a realization and said, "Master, are you saying that we should get Yi Wushuang to look for us?" "That's right." Yi Chen nodded lightly and said, "Of course. Things haven't reached that stage yet. Whether it's the Emperor's throne powerhouse from the Jade Lake Sacred Land or the Great Yin's Emperorship, I'm not afraid at all." He was not bragging at all. Once he stepped into the God transformation stage, he would have many techniques that he could use. He would not be like before. "All right, let's do as you say." The Patriarch of Hell finally finalized the plan. "Fellow Yi, go and pick up Ming Ming. I'll continue to stay in a Huang kingdom. Once I break through, I'll look for you guys immediately." Yi Chen nodded lightly. The Great Yin Imperial Dynasty was related to his parents' whereabouts. He had a feeling that the Great Yin Imperial Dynasty would be the best breakthrough point. Perhaps he could even find out Su Yuhan's whereabouts. The night passed uneventfully. At dawn the next day, Yi Chen returned to the Tianfeng Sea area with Xiao He. 10,000 meters in the sky, Yi Chen headed straight for the Great Li Dynasty with Xiao He. When they passed by the Qingmu Fort, Xiao He said, "Master, the Qingmu Fort is below us. Should we go down and take a look?" Before Yi Chen went to Eastern Wilderness, he forcefully tore open a spatial rift and arrived there. Xiao He first went to the Qingmu Fort according to his orders before rushing to Eastern Wilderness through the Great Li Dynasty's teleportation formation. There's no need. It's not that important whether we meet or not. Through his divine consciousness, he could already sense that the current situation of the Qingmu Fort was rather good. Since that was the case, there was naturally no need to go down and meet them. The group rushed to Zhongzhou through the Great Li Dynasty's teleportation formation. Then they parted ways with the dozen or so martial saints that Xiao He had borrowed from the Daluo dynasty. Yi Chen led Xiao He straight to the northern region of Zhongzhou.